Hello, Ohio, and welcome to Equality Ohio's first ever statewide nonpartisan candidate forum. We are so excited to have you joining us this evening as we talk to the candidates and we get their perspective, their views on the issues facing LGBTQ plus Ohioans. We're so excited that you would join us tonight for this very important conversation. We know that here in Ohio in 2022, voting and elections are so important. Voting is one of the most important things you can do right now to help bring about more legal and lived equality here in Ohio. We are so excited to bring an entire slate of statewide candidates here for you this evening as we move throughout the evening. As a reminder, our statewide candidates are going to be joining us at different time slots. So if you come back later in this evening, you're going to see other statewide candidates such as Governor, Attorney General, Secretary of State, and Auditor of State. As we also go through the evening, we're going to be talking about different issues, as well as about the Equality Ohio scorecard, which is your best and biggest tool for finding out where your lawmakers and wannabe lawmakers stand when it comes to LGBTQ plus equality in Ohio. All right, so we are ready to get started with a very exciting evening. And first, I'm going to welcome to join us our Director of Public Policy here at Equality Ohio, Maria Bruno.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. It has been a very exciting few weeks as we've gotten this together, but we're so excited to see the candidates show up. And as Siobhan mentioned, we put this on because we really think it's important that voters not just understand their ballot, but really have a firm understanding of where candidates stand and what they're voting on. So today we're going to talk about a few different parts of the ballot, including but not limited to the candidates. So we also have our scorecard, as Siobhan mentioned. We did our homework so you don't have to. We did a write-up on many of the candidates that you will see here today, as well as their opponents. This is a nonpartisan 501c3 event. That means that we are not here to take a position or tell you who to vote for. We are here to hear from the candidates who are going to tell us why they're going to support LGBTQ community members. And I will pass it back to Siobhan, who will introduce our first slate.
So we are starting right at the top of the ballot this evening with the race for governor. And I have the delight of introducing our first moderator for the evening, and that is a friend of mine. I'm so excited that he is joining us this evening, and that is Raphael Davis Williams, who has an amazing bio, and that's why I'm going to read it, because it's just so good. Raphael Davis Williams has worn many different hats across a variety of careers, but always with a singular mission and goal: improving the lives of marginalized folks, especially Black people and other people of color, by aggressively advocating for meaningful, lasting, systemic change in America's institutions and seats of power. Raphael has held his position as Director of Equity and Inclusion at the ACLU of Ohio since 2019, and before coming to that position, he was with the he graduated in 1992 from Sam Houston State University, and then spent 14 years as a television news reporter prior to completing all coursework absent a final thesis for a Master's of Liberal Arts degree, concentrating in government at Harvard University. He then earned his JD at the OSU Moritz College of Law in 2010, and has been serving on the board of the ACLU as well as Kaleidoscope Youth Center. I know Raphael is going to be an amazing moderator this evening. Welcome, Raphael. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much, Siobhan. It's a pleasure to be here, and I am thrilled to take part in this particular forum because I think it's so important. And I'm going to read a bit of a statement here before we get going. I don't want to be rude to our first candidate, but I think it is important that we establish very clearly some of the understandings of where we are. And so despite its flaws or shortcomings, It's difficult to argue against our American form of democracy as an ingenious way to organize a government. At the heart, the very core of our democracy is the inalienable right to self-govern. Our founding fathers built our democracy on the premise that we, the people, are in charge of creating the society and culture within which we choose to live, that in this representative democracy, the voters choose their elected officials. Politicians do not get to choose the voters to put them in office. Inherent in the American system of government, established some 246 years ago, is the requirement that those seeking elected office explain to the folks who might vote for them why they should check the box next to their name. Does the vision for the kind of community and society that we all want to live in align with the voter's vision? Do the values of the person seeking to be the voter's representative connect with the values of the voter? The best and frankly the only way for voters to get the answers to these questions is to ask the candidate directly. The ACLU of Ohio is a 102-year-old organization. It was founded on a single unflinching principle to defend the United States Constitution. The Constitution is the ACLU's client. And I'm proud to be a part of this rich history. The ACLU is a nonpartisan organization, and I will repeat that again. The ACLU of Ohio is a nonpartisan organization. And for those of you who may be a bit unclear about what that means, it means the ACLU does not take sides in elections. We do not endorse or oppose candidates seeking elected office. Our nonpartisanship is the center of what we do. And if you want proof, just ask any of the presidential administrations between starting, I think, with Warren G. Harding up through today. We've sued every presidential administration since we formed, every one of them, Democrats and Republicans alike. And I doubt they would think we were an arm of either of their parties. The ACLU agreed to participate in Equality Ohio's Nonpartisan Candidates Forum because we believe Ohioans deserve to hear directly from the candidates who are asking them to cast their votes for the candidate. And we are frankly disappointed that several candidates from one party opted to forego the chance to persuade nearly the 500,000 people who are represented by Equality Ohio and asked for their votes. But again, democracy demands an informed electorate, and we will not simply throw up our hands in frustration and give up on the opportunity to educate Ohioans about the issues issues that matter to them most. So we are moving forward with the candidates who did show up and who are choosing to share their views with us, and we strongly encourage each of you not to let tonight be the end of your quest to learn about the candidates and the offices on the ballot this November 8th. And so with that, we will turn to Nan Whaley, who is here as the Democratic candidate for governor here in Ohio. Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Why don't we start with a bit about you and why you are seeking the office of governor of the state of Ohio.
Well, thank you, Raphael, and I'm really excited to be part of this forum, and we're trying to go to as many forums as possible across the state of Ohio. And your points about democracy, I think, are well taken. As many folks know, my opponent has refused to even debate us, which is one of the cornerstones of democracy, too, having this discourse between two sides. And I think it's because he has some really unpopular positions, some that we're probably going to talk about today, in his positions on LGBT issues, on abortion access, on the largest corruption scandal in Ohio history and how he, as state official, won, and whether or not he supported Trump saying that the election actually was stolen or not. These are things he doesn't want to answer, and so he has decided instead to hide, which it may be a political tactic, but frankly, it's really bad for the democracy. And so that's what we're seeing across our state, which is unfortunate. And just I wanted to make that point as you've made this great statement, frankly, about what's at stake in these elections this November. I'm Nan Whaley, the former mayor of Dayton. I was the mayor for 8 years. Loved being mayor. Mayor's a job where you get to be visionary about where you want your community to go, but at the same time, you got to, fill the potholes and plow the snow, or they'll kick your tail out of office. And love doing that work. You get to work with local folks and really work to grow your community. And it was a tough decision for me to decide to run for governor. The reason why I decided to run, frankly, is I looked across the state. We have local leaders, mayors, county commissioners, City council is doing their level best to move their communities forward, but they don't have a partner in the governor's office or the state house. They continually get told what to do, trying to go after home rule, for example, getting cuts from the state house. And I just imagine the opportunity for growth in this state could be much better if we actually had a governor in the state house that was actually working and partnering with local communities. And so that's why I decided to run.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So let's start with some questions specific to the LGBTQ plus community. Why should those who are either a part of this community or allies or accomplices in this community?
Accomplices?
Why should, oh yeah.
Okay.
Why should we check your name on the governor list and instead of your opponent?
Well, first, let me talk about my past history with the LGBTQ plus community. I'm really proud in Dayton. I've been called by the LGBTQ community in Dayton as their strongest ally. It's one of the things I'm most proud of. Really worked as a city commissioner early on to move the non-discrimination ordinance in our housing policy. So in Dayton, you cannot be discriminated based on your sexual orientation like you can in the rest of the state. Really trying to move forward. I was proud to be the first perform the first marriage in the state of Ohio after Obergefell. And so this is the work that I think is really important in being a partner and an ally with LGBTQ community. I'd say secondly too, I think it's really important for our state to be a growing, inclusive state. And that was my key in Dayton and how we saw so much growth is, we always said no matter who you love, where you come from, or what you believe, you're welcome in Dayton. And sadly, we don't have that case in Ohio. Like I mentioned, there are places, if you're in the larger cities, you're safer with your sexual orientation not being discriminated against, but it shouldn't be stopping at city lines. We need these actions to be statewide. Further, what we see with this governor and the state house is they are actively against the LGBTQ community. And what the community's had to do is actually defend themselves from bad things happening instead of having a partner in the governor's office. And I think that's the big difference that you'll see between me and my opponent. I also want to mention that the very first year Dayton could get scored by the Human Rights Campaign. They're called the Municipal Equality Index. The very first year, because we weren't one of the big fancy cities, so we had to wait a couple years. We got a perfect score from the very first year forward, and I'm proud of that legacy and how important it was to show that Ohio can be an inclusive state if we had our local leaders really leading in the governor and state house.
Thank you for that. So you mentioned a couple of times some of the legislation or some of the stances that are taken by Governor DeWine toward the LGBTQ community. But speak a bit about how you can reach across the aisle. What can you do, as the head of the state, head of this state? How do you improve the conditions? How do you work with the legislature to not attack the LGBTQ community?
Well, look, I mean, as part of the ACLU, that we have an illegitimate state house right now because of redistricting not being followed. The voters of Ohio went forward to change the Ohio Constitution to do just exactly what you said in your statement, to make sure that voters picked their politicians, the politicians don't pick their voters. And the governor and the entire state house, Republican leadership, ignored not once, not twice, but 7 times and drew unconstitutional, unfair maps for the state legislature. So the state house that's being run for this November is an illegitimate state house, in my view. It's one that has been declared unconstitutional by the Ohio Supreme Court, and they don't care. They want to do it anyway. We have a real opportunity when we have the election this November. The governor sits on the redistricting commission, and no matter what happens, these lines are going to be redrawn for 2024. That's an important part because I want to be honest, in 22 to 24, once I'm elected, we're going to stop bad things from happening for the LGBTQ community. We'll have a partner at the governor's office that will stop the illegitimate legislature from attacking, which is what they're doing now. We can give example after example that what they've done to the community particularly. But then in the second half of the term, when we have voters that get to pick their politicians instead of the other way around with new maps, we'll have a real opportunity to have common sense legislation that means that we'll be an inclusive state. I believe Ohio, if left to its own devices without the illegitimate state legislature getting in the middle, is a common sense state. And the key to growth for this state is one that's inclusive and open and welcomes people into this state. And that's especially important when you're talking about the LGBTQ community.
What do you say to the rural person who is an LGBT member of the LGBTQ community who otherwise disagrees with you, disagrees with some of maybe your policies, your tax policies, or some of your other policies? How do you convince them that this is an important issue for them to choose you over your opponent?
Raphael, I always say nobody agrees with me all the time, not even my husband, right? So I never agree with anybody. You'll never get me at 100% on every single issue. I think that's part of what's great about the democracy. But look, what is key around not only what is right, and I think morally right about being inclusive, but secondly, we know it's a key to growth for the state. This November, this state has a choice. It can continue to be closed off. It can continue to exclude women, LGBTQ folks, to push really, really regressive anti-growth policies right now, or it can choose to go to the light, as I like to say, and really have a place that is going to be welcoming, that's going to grow the economy. Because when you work on these kind of issues, frankly, you see growth. It's the key to growth in the state. And so whether you're in a rural community and you may disagree with me on pieces of tax policy, this is a basic fundamental rail about how important it is for the state to grow. We are not going to be a state that grows if we don't welcome LGBTQ folks. We are not going to be a state that grows if we tell women what they have to do with their body. That's not going to work for our state to really have true growth.
Sure. Let's move to a more substantive policy area. So gender-affirming surgery. That's one of the things that is seems to be a hot button issue now, even though it probably should not be. What's your stance on protecting not only the ability to do so, but protecting those individuals from harassment and some of the other things that, especially youth, and that's really where I'm thinking it's the young people in particular. How do you protect them?
Look, I get conversations regularly with parents that are very, very concerned about whether or not they're going to stay in this state or not based on how their kids are being treated, particularly as they're transitioning. There's about 450 kids just in the Cincinnati Children's that this is affecting, right? The decisions of the State House. So number one, it is very important that these decisions are personal decisions and ones that the state legislature should not get in. And that's my point. When I'm elected governor, we will stop the state legislature from getting in the midst of these conversations with the power of the veto. So there's a huge opportunity there. And that's why this position is so important. But secondly, we need to support our kids, no matter who they are. It is really important that we create places that have anti-bullying, frankly. We know that is a big challenge, particularly for children that are transitioning. And then secondly, we need to make sure that we give these families the opportunity to really go through these, and it's difficult transitions for these folks. We have to be honest about that in these families, and giving them that opportunity to do that, and partnering with the children's hospitals that are, I think, doing a great job in this work, and giving them the power to do that rather than getting in the way, like the state legislature likes to do around healthcare decisions.
Thank you. What about, let's move to Title IX. When there's such pushback against in the popular media about the potential for as it is quoted, biological boys to be on girls' teams and those things, how do you convince those folks who have genuine concerns about whether or not we're creating an unequal playing field? How do you convince them that something along those lines is actually necessary, that it is a good policy?
We need to remember that we're talking about children, right? I think that's where we need to really start the conversation, because when we get into these, very out of touch conversations, frankly, we forget that we're talking about kids wanting to play a sport. We go to, either our children's or for me, my niece and nephew's soccer games. These are kids. So I think we need to start there and remember who we're talking about. And then secondly, I think, we've just got to stop just the insane extremism that's gone at the State House. Again, when we're seeing bills that are talking about genital examinations at the State House, these are extreme, out of touch, out of sync actions. And I really believe the majority of Ohioans are with us.
Let's move to economics. Intel is on their way, or the ground has been broken for their new chip factory. How will you ensure that the LGBTQ community, gets to share in that, what everyone is anticipating will be an economic windfall for the state?
Well, let me say a couple of things about Intel first, just in general. Look, I think we're all excited that it's coming. The state of Ohio has been invested $2 billion into Intel. It's the largest investment in Ohio's history. And frankly, Ohio taxpayers have gotten very little details about what we're getting for that $2 billion. Now, Mike DeWine loves to make big announcements with big red ribbon cuttings, but the details after are quite scant. We've seen this example, for example, in Wood County, where a Peloton was supposedly coming with 2,000 jobs. Mike DeWine came for the ribbon cutting, and no jobs came behind it. So I'm really concerned overall about what Ohio taxpayers are getting in return for this $2 billion. And we need to have more disclosure and more transparency on this deal, which we're not seeing really. And you can tell Intel's changing their numbers of jobs, how much they're offering back based on every kind of whim. And so when we are a partner, an investor, $2 billion of our money into this deal, we need a lot more details than what we're getting. And Mike DeWine's track record of holding companies accountable after they get begged tax breaks is very, very poor. So I think that would be really important once I'm elected governor. Secondly, look, we have to make sure that these sites are inclusive. Like, I think, Intel should be concerned if they have a state legislature that is going after the LGBT community. Intel should also be concerned that they have a state legislature and a governor that calls himself the most anti-choice governor in the country, right? Because when we see that is the number one issue in this state, when you go to small businesses or big companies alike, the number one issue they say with Ohio is its workforce. And when you're not an inclusive state, and you're not bringing the best talent because you have exclusionary laws and rules for people to live in the state, it affects workforce. We know the best workforces are actually the ones that include the LGBTQ community and include women. And for the state to be so exclusionary and so extreme on these issues, that affects Intel and it affects every single workforce issue in the state. That's, I think, the big issue for our state as we're moving forward.
So let me before we leave that subject, what if you inherit? What if after, let's open our crystal ball and you are elected governor?
Thank you.
And it is a bad deal. What if it is a bad deal? How do you then navigate that because of the fact that things are already the wheels are already in motion?
Well, look, I think sunlight's the best use for this, right? Number one, we need to share with taxpayers what we're getting for what we're buying. And I think, number one, no matter what the deal is, you would see that out of my administration, so we can assess it. I think that's really important. Secondly, look, I'm gonna use the power of the governor's office to make sure that Ohio's getting good paying jobs in return. And we've talked a lot, the governor's talked a lot about it's going to be built, for example, with union work, right? But we want to make sure that the people cleaning the bathrooms are getting paid a decent wage too. We want to make sure that we have real quality jobs, because that's why we invest in them as a state, is to make sure that people can provide for their family for that job. And I will use the power of the governor's office for whatever the deal is to make sure that those values are in place, not just making sure that Intel is whole. We need to make sure Ohio is whole in it.
Thank you. And I cannot believe I'm disagreeing with time, that we are almost out of time.
Are you serious?
We are almost out of time. But let's switch one more time to crime and safety. The LGBTQ community is notoriously targeted in crime, and Black transgender women in particular suffer crime. What do you propose to ensure this community that will be safe in Ohio, especially those who are targeted the most?
Well, first, I think making sure that people know about these is a big issue, and I'm really proud of the LGBTQ community, really like on Transgender Remembrance Day and the work to make those be seen, right? Particularly for the loss of folks that we've lost before, I think is really important. And then secondly, we need to fully prosecute hate crimes. These are hate crimes. We need to fully prosecute them so it's not just acceptable, particularly as you mentioned, how Black transgender folks are being treated. I think those are two things the governor can do. This will be another key point for the Attorney General because they can do a lot of great leadership, and I know Jeff Crossman will do that. We've not seen that out of Dave Yost at all, but there's opportunities, particularly for the state, to really move and, again, be focused on governing Ohio's values, which is an inclusive state. I believe in our heart that this state is a place that wants to include everyone. We have a radical, extreme governor and state house that don't want to do that.
Okay. And with the last few minutes that we have, I will open it up to you to make whatever final statement or pitch that you
Oh, that's nice of you. Look, I would just encourage everyone to vote. Voting is, registering to vote, the deadline is October 11th, and October 12th is early vote. And you never know what's going to happen on November 8th. November 8th is the last day of the election, so encourage people to get their absentee in, go vote early, put it in the bank, as I like to say. And secondly, check, the voter card for Equality Ohio. Equality Ohio and HRC have done a lot of work really asking us tough questions for a longer period of time than we have here. I'm proud to have an A and hope that folks will pay attention to these important issues, because not only are these important issues to you if you're an LGBTQ plus person, but they're important to the future of Ohio. An Ohio that is inclusive of the LGBTQ community is an Ohio that is growing, an Ohio that is thriving, an Ohio that is caring, and you have my commitment as the next governor of Ohio. You'll have a governor that cares about all those things too, which is very, very new.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you joining us. Nan Whaley, Democratic candidate for governor.
Thank you, Nan Whaley, for joining us. I want to reiterate that Governor DeWine was invited. He chose not to come. But we want to emphasize how important the governor's office really is. I mean, they are not just on the Ohio Redistricting Commission. They also are the leader of the whole state. They even recruit the state agency leads. And so there is a lot of opportunity for the shaping of our state depending on who wins governor. I'm actually going to, I told you all tonight's about the whole ballot, and so we are going to talk about issue 1. So I am going to invite my dear friend Patrick Higgins up to discuss issue 1, what it is and what you'll be voting on when you show up to vote.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Patrick Higgins, and I have the pleasure of serving as policy counsel at the ACLU of Ohio, which my colleague Raphael, who now escapes me, gave you a primer on before. So happy to talk to you about issue 1, which is going to be on your ballot the same day as these other important races. Issue 1 is a proposed constitutional amendment. So big takeaway there, constitutional amendment that will change, if successful, our state constitution when it comes to bail. And so you're going to hear a lot about bail reform as we build up to the election. And so I'm going to give you hopefully some important information as we get there. What issue 1 proposes is 2 primary changes. The first being that in the factors that a judge considers when setting a cash bail amount, that courts must consider public safety. So keep that in mind as the first change. The second is a change that proposes that the authority to set the rules and procedures of what gets considered when setting bail is taken away from the Supreme Court of Ohio and its rulemaking authority and given to our General Assembly. And so when we think about some of these important points we already talked about tonight, we're talking about rulemaking authority from our Supreme Court justices, highest court in the state, given to our state lawmakers in our General Assembly in Columbus. And so what are proponents saying about issue 1? Proponents of issue 1 are saying this is necessary. Our public is less safe because of a Supreme Court decision that happened in January of this year. It was called DuBose v. McGuffey. I won't bore you with the details. I also don't have nearly enough time to talk through that tonight. But DuBose v. McGuffey was a reading of Ohio's Constitution along with the bail procedure in our state. And what that decision said was, hey, courts who are setting cash bail so high that a person could never afford to get out, we have a tool for preventing people from getting bail. It's not setting cash bail so high that a person could never hope to obtain it. It also made some other changes when it comes to standard of review. Again, not going to bore you too much tonight. But as you might imagine, as with many decisions in our state Supreme Court, it was a split decision with 4 justices siding with the majority or with the court's opinion and 3 dissenting. Among those dissenters was another candidate who pointed out our public is in danger because of this, as we take that tool out of the toolkit of judges to set cash bail so high that a person could never obtain their release. So shortly thereafter, we saw joint resolutions come out of our state lawmakers. Those are the first step in getting this on the ballot, as you'll see in November. That was rushed through our legislature. It happened between March and May, and as those of you who are familiar with our state house know, things that happen in that short of a period of time are miracles. That's what gets us to issue 1. So again, those 2 changes are courts must require public safety when setting cash bail amounts, and 2, change in who gets to set the rules about bail procedure. What are opponents saying about issue 1? And I'll be candid here, ACLU of Ohio has joined the opponents to issue 1, so please take what I say from that lens as well. Opponents are saying this fix is not needed. It's not necessary. The court's decision in that DuBose v. McGuffey case was a straightforward, correct reading of the law. The purpose of cash bail is to make sure that a person comes back for their court date. It should not be so excessive that they can't ever secure the release because of the amount of money in their bank account. Opponents are also saying cash bail does not keep us safe. We know that it hasn't happened in the past. We know that it doesn't happen now. We know it's not going to happen in the future. Because if Maria and I committed the same crime tonight, we're both considered the same risk to the public, but Maria makes a lot more money than I do. Maria gets to pay for her release. And I sit in jail until my trial date because I can't post bail. So opponents are saying cash bail, that exact situation, because it happens over and over again, does not keep us safe because people can still pay for the release if there are genuine concerns about public safety. What opponents are also saying is that this is going to have a real human cost. Opponents are pointing out a system called wealth-based detention, which means that people, again, based on the amount of money in their bank accounts, sit in jail before their trial date. That impacts their ability to pay rent, to go to their jobs, to pick their kids up from school. And opponents don't think that's just. And so one other thing, just to underscore, because I'm getting my 1-minute warning, there are real human costs of issue 1. And so as you listen to this tug of war over what public safety means, I encourage you to take a look at a broad picture of public safety, at what it means to the families who are impacted by our criminal justice system. So I'll wrap up, but I appreciate the time tonight, and I encourage you to keep learning from Equality Ohio and other advocates as you learn more about issue 1.
Good evening, everyone. So excited to see so many people here this evening. My name is Elena Jochum. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm Equality Ohio's Executive Director. So thrilled that you are joining us for this important event tonight. And it is my honor to welcome our wonderful moderator back to the stage, Raphael Davis-Williams, and to welcome candidate Taylor Sappington to the stage, please. A reminder that we invited all candidates running for office to this, and opposing candidate Keith Faber did not accept the outreach, so we welcome you to the stage. The office of Auditor is an important office. It is a watchdog of our government. It audits every office in state government. It also holds a seat on the Redistricting Commission, which we have seen is a vital role for the preservation and advancement of our democracy. So with that, I turn it over to our moderator and to our guest this evening.
Thank you, Elena. Welcome, Taylor. It is good to have the opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you for having me.
I'll make sure that is the There we go. Here we go.
Thank you for having me.
There we go. So again, I'll start with the probably, or what I hope will be the easiest question. Tell us about you and why you believe you are an advocate on the state level for the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, great question. So my name's Taylor Sappington. I'm running for state auditor, and I'm really excited to be here. I'm from Nelsonville, and so that means this is like the highest up in the air I've been in a long time. So Nelsonville's a small town down 33 if you haven't been. It's a beautiful town. I'm proud to be raised in a small town, and it means a lot to be here, so I just want to say thank you before I get to the question. Thank you for having me. This means a lot as a kid. Once in the closet, not sure who he was, in a small town. It means a lot to be sitting here as a candidate on a big stage, and the first openly gay, openly LGBTQ candidate here in Ohio, though certainly, hopefully not the last. So how will I be an advocate? My history in Nelsonville shows that I'm a pretty fierce fighter. One of my favorite phrases is "don't mistake my kindness for weakness." And I mean that intimately. So I'll smile and I'll be polite, but I'm patient, I'm dedicated, and I'm results-based. I have taken on corruption in Nelsonville. I have earned jail time and restitution on behalf of the taxpayer when they were stolen from. I have fought against the census, which was going to downgrade Nelsonville from a city to a village. One of the few examples in Ohio history that a city decided to take on that challenge. My office led it, because the revised code says the city auditor leads that effort. Who the heck knows why? But I was proud to take on that effort, and then we did it. And further, Nelsonville's gone from its worst deficit to its best surplus. So none of those happen to be issues you brought up, right? But what I hope to say is that, and I hope to leave the impression of with this answer is, I don't quit. I outlast my opponents, and I want to be a strong, fierce advocate for our communities and for our people in this state. Because across this state and leadership right now, we are run by folks, too many of them criminals themselves. But Ohio is run by folks who don't get it. They've been in office longer than I've been alive. They've made a lot of money in office, and I come from a working class background, and they don't advocate on the issues we care about. And frankly, I will be the exact opposite of all of those things. I'll be the youngest person in executive office since Sherrod Brown. I'll be an openly gay person, a small town person, a working class person, and I'll be a fierce fighter on a whole range of issues.
Thank you for that. And so let's start actually with, or I shouldn't say start, we'll continue with what may seem like a basic question, but how, as an auditor, as the state auditor, what can you do to defend or protect the LGBTQ community?
So really good question. So some issues are, some approaches are indirect, right? So just by being there and existing, that's going to be really different for a lot of people. It's going to be really different than what we've experienced in Ohio politics. And so like going around the state, even when talking about my coming out story or just being openly gay and being in politics, even when those aren't the main thing I'm talking about, because it's an auditor's race, right? We're talking about a lot of money and redistricting. There are people in the room who I don't even know exist till the end. They come up to me and say what it means to them to see somebody trying, to see somebody existing, to see somebody like them. And so I won't be from this class of folks who run Ohio who don't care about LGBTQ issues unless they're trying to drum up their base with radical legislation. And I'll be, quite frankly, can you imagine the difference if we had somebody in office, whether it be Secretary of State, whether it be Auditor, or even the governor's office in the last 6 or 8 years, who was vocal and out there and speaking on these issues and fighting back? I think it would be like a whole different scenario for us, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is more practical. On the redistricting commission, the state auditor will sit. The next state auditor will sit on the redistricting commission. And unless we can get somebody who cares about fair maps, who cares about issues like guns in our schools, LGBTQ issues, just funding our schools, we're going to get maps again. Unless we get that, our maps are going to be radical, and they're going to be gerrymandered, and they're going to be unconstitutional. And only extremists are going to come from those maps, or at least the majority. So on the redistricting commission, we've got to win that seat. And as auditor, I'll fight for districts that make sense for our neighborhoods, where common sense, regular folks can run and compete in a way they can't right now.
Let's talk about experience. So your opponent, Keith Faber, has a long history of as a legislator in the state house, and is the incumbent in this race for state auditor. What do you say to those who say being the youngest isn't an attribute? It's a negative, or not being out, from that class isn't, that class of established politicians isn't a good thing. That's a bad thing. How do you respond to that?
Well, I can say I've been pat on the shoulder and told, you'll learn what someday, kid, way too many times. So I definitely get the attitude, and although I disagree with it, I know there are some folks who think that way. So, and then I will also agree that Keith Faber has either been running for office or in office since I was playing with Power Rangers in the late 90s. Or Barney, depending on, most rooms only get one or the other reference, so I should just say both. So, yeah, he's been in office for a while. He's been trying to run Ohio for a while, and he's been pretty extreme and partisan for a while. And I haven't been in a state office. I'm from a small city. And so what I'd say is that there are some advantages here. So being young and different, being openly gay and honest and transparent, being from a working class background forces a person, all of those things force a person to be honest with themselves in such a way that you run genuinely as who you are as a person. And so even though he's on payroll, so you'll probably think he'll agree with me no matter what, my campaign manager in the back can vouch for when we first met and said, are we going to do this thing? Am I really going to jump in a statewide race? And of course, when we said yes, I said that it's going to be about who I am as a person and who people are that we're asking to vote. We're not asking for ideology, though I have one, and we're not asking for dogma, though my opponent has some. We're asking folks to believe in themselves, to believe in Ohio's future, to get over the cynicism that you can't win, you can't run, you can't change Ohio, it's never going to be better. I'm sick of that stuff. And I don't mean to sound intense about it, but Ohio is just Georgia waiting to realize it's Virginia, right? I mean, I got an eye roll from that one back in the back, by the way. I earned that one. But Ohio, seriously, Ohio is really just, we're at this moment still a democracy, folks, and we're just waiting to wake up. And though many of us may be already there, it's a lot of work to get 11 or 12 million folks on the same page. And I think it's going to take somebody different to do all of that. Sorry, that was a long, I took you on a journey to get to that one, but.
Through Georgia and Virginia. So you mentioned redistricting a couple of times. And we know that's been top of mind. What do you say to those individuals who say we don't need to change the way that we are drawing our maps, and that our maps are actually reflective of the will of the people in Ohio?
So I would point to a couple things to disprove that Ohio's maps reflect the will of the people. One is on abortion. So we have over 60% of the state feels that at least the Roe standard should exist. And some numbers have it as high as 70%. But we have a legislature and a governor that have passed restrictions down to 6 weeks, which is absurd. And we have a state auditor and a governor who have said in the next term, should they get it, they will pass complete bans without exception. And so just by looking at if somebody doesn't believe the numbers, then I don't know what to tell them at that point. But the numbers show Ohio feels a certain way about common sense gun reform, about abortion access, about LGBTQ issues, about believing that you should be able to marry who you want and who you love. But we have a state legislature that's trying to unravel all of it, right? It's got to be changed. Those maps have to be changed. And I got asked the other day in an interview that essentially this reporter took a quote from my opponent who said, the Democrats aren't actually fighting for fairness. The Democrats are just fighting for Democratic maps. And I said, you know, there might be some Democrats, maybe some here today, I don't know. I don't know your full schedule and I don't know all their opinions. There are Democrats who just want Democratic maps. But I can assure you, being somebody who doesn't owe his career to anything other than a good team and force of will, and coming from a place where I'm not part of this established class of folks who run this state truly, I'm fighting for competitive maps. And there are a lot of folks out there who are advocating for competitive maps. And that's what we've got to get to. Or it's just going to get, it's almost like a competition for the legislators, right? Who can come up with the wackiest, most damaging, most terrible bill this week. And what we found is that it used to be 10 years ago, that this was almost like a meme, like a joke. You put out this bill, and your voters knew you were extremely radical, but you really weren't going to pass it. Well, what we found since then is that they'll actually pass some of them, right? They'll actually be like, no, we'll just ban abortion without exception and force a 10-year-old to go to Indiana. And so that is an extreme legislature. That is a legislature full of extremists, and that has to be changed.
How would you reform the system? So to the extent you can, understand in your role as auditor.
So within the current system as auditor, I would push with the Democrats, and any headway we can make with some of the Republicans, hopefully with the Governor Whaley and Secretary of State Clark in the back, to make competitive maps. If this system is not going to work, if this system is just going to result in maps every single election, map drawing every single election, and chaos where people don't know what district they're in, and we have some friends in labor here who labor didn't even know who to endorse in what districts because they didn't exist, right? We didn't even know who was where. In fact, one of the smartest things somebody told me, I said, how's running for State House going? To one of my friends, and he said, well, we can't run, we're walking. We're just meandering for State House because there's no districts. Moral of the story is, if this district or this process is not going to work, then I am totally in favor of another referendum to either add enforcement clauses to it or to make it a completely independent board without elected officials.
How does that? So we talk. There's been a lot of talk about the districts and finding a way to make them more competitive. Literally on a ground level, how does that impact the LGBTQ person who's out in rural Ohio, who's literally just trying to survive? How do the districts impact? What is the real world impact for LGBTQ folks, frankly, for anyone? But how is that so? Why is that so important?
So I think there's probably a really easy way to answer this, but I'm going to go for the more thoughtful, meandering way, if you guys haven't learned about me yet. So I honestly want to avoid the political route, because you're sort of like prognosticating there, the political answer. The real world answer is, and I don't mean to bring up a heavy subject, but so my family is survivors of 3 different suicides in the family, including my partner in 2016. And it was just a month after Trump was elected. So just 6 days before Christmas. There is no doubt in my mind that the chaos of the world, attacks from politicians, headlines, people using terrible terms to describe people like him or myself, there's no doubt in my mind that had an impact. There's no doubt in my mind that people saying, I guess I won't say it because it's a this is a beautiful forum, and I don't want to like curse here, but the F your feelings crowd, there's no doubt in my mind that that had an impact. So when you have state legislators for years on end, bouncing from state house to state senate, who are attacking trans folks, who are attacking the gay kid or in high school, or even an adult who's trying to figure out who they are, it impacts them personally. Though politically, it may push a person to the other party, right? If a Republican's attacking you as a person, you're more likely to vote for Democrat or some other party. So politically, it's going to make more Democrats. But personally, it's damaging to people. It hurts people. And people lose their lives. And so, am I saying that redistricting increases suicide rates? Not necessarily. But am I saying that if you force us into maps where only extremists who are going to attack people can win, that's going to have a human cost for sure.
So let's broaden it out just a bit and think about governing in general. Again, and I mean no disrespect at all to the state auditor's office, but there's limited powers there, and there's a limited reach. So how do you improve government for all? And that's whether you are a Democrat or Republican, independent or whatever. How does your ascension to office improve governing in Ohio?
So the first thing is that electing somebody who actually cares about corruption and taking it on, instead of taking part in it, is going to make a difference for all of us. In Nelsonville, once we threw the folks stealing from us in jail, we found it a lot easier to fill potholes. Now, don't get me wrong. Don't drive to Nelsonville today and be like, I found the pothole on Poplar Street, Taylor. In fact, it's just down from your house. There are still potholes. But the truth of the matter is we went from our biggest deficit to our biggest surplus, not including federal funds. And we were able to deliver the biggest investments in water, sewer, and streets in the city's history. So biggest surplus while still investing the largest amount in infrastructure in the city's history, while also having the first training budgets for employees in over a decade and investing in our people. It makes a difference. When you can, sorry, you gotta get used to this. I'm just a small town kid, guys. This is a big deal for me. So when you can make government work, you can get what I call, and what many folks call, it's not my idea, somebody smarter than me thought of this, when you can get rid of the corruption tax, the amount we're all paying because watchdogs aren't doing their job and because people are stealing or misappropriating, you can afford to invest in your state, you can afford to invest in your people. That will have a direct impact across the state. Taking on things like highway contracts sounds pretty boring, right? But if you can make contracts and bids work better, you're gonna have better highways and freeways and roads. And we all want that, right? I mean, the Governor Whitmer, just north of us, ran on a platform of fix the damn potholes. That was on her yard sign, right? And we can relate here in Ohio. But more so, how will repeat the question real quick for me, the short version.
How will your ascension to the state auditor's office improve overall governing in the state of Ohio?
Oh, gotcha, right. So it's not just financial. I wanted to say this too, because this is an important issue, especially since we've got friends in the room who really care about this issue. Education is a great example. In my talks with folks from the OEA in the past, there was an important issue that I didn't even know about as far as how the auditor can impact it in terms of Youngstown, East Cleveland, Lorain, and some school districts that Keith Faber is currently administering and overseeing because of fiscal emergency or state takeover, essentially. What's currently happening is that Republicans like Faber are using it as an opportunity to go after teachers' unions and to go after public education, because that's not what they believe in. And they're using the office as a weapon instead of as a tool. I think a good, strong, intelligent state auditor is going to use that position to be a data collector and a listener. Auditor and auditory, right, have the same root word. So a good auditor is going to be a good listener and find out how are things working, should they be working this way, and how can we make them work better? And that's going to make a difference, not just in potholes, but in our schools and all kinds of issues.
Okay, Taylor, I'm going to buck the system for you right now and give you 30 seconds to explain your final pitch to LGBTQ folks in Ohio and Ohioans in general, why you are the better candidate for state auditor.
So I'm a better candidate for state auditor because, actually, we're just gonna make this like a TV ad, okay? I'm Taylor Sappington, and I am so proud to be the youngest person running for this office ever, the first openly gay person to run for statewide office, though hopefully not the last here in Ohio. And I come from a place most people understand, a small town. I was raised in a trailer by a single mom who, when she lost her job, we struggled. Disconnect notices, the car was repossessed, which is a big deal in rural Ohio, right? Or all of Ohio. And I get where most folks come from in Ohio, a place that Keith Faber couldn't even imagine. And I think we deserve leadership that looks like that and sounds like that and gets what most Ohioans understand. And that's not just, it's Ohio everywhere from Columbus in this room to folks like I was, just a kid trying to come out of a shell in a trailer in Nelsonville. And I think everyone in that scenario is better off. Thank you
very much.
Thank you so much, Taylor, for all of that. That was actually very entertaining. And as a point of personal privilege, I really appreciate everyone here being so accommodating. We were hoping to have a stream upstairs so you wouldn't have to constantly be traveling in between, but we really appreciate everyone making adaptations to our tech issues. We have about 8 seats up here. So if anyone is back here feeling really scrunched up, there is space back up here, and I will not be offended if you walk in front of me while I introduce my next guest, which is Colin Morazzi. I gotta be honest, you all, ACLU is really helping us carry this event. They've both offered both a presenter as well as 2 separate presenters on the ballot issues. So we are excited to welcome Colin, who's gonna tell you about issue 2 on your ballot.
All right, well, good evening, everyone. And thank you to our good friends at Equality Ohio for inviting the ACLU to participate here. I wanna talk about issue 2. Much like my colleagues said about issue 1. Oh, is that better? Okay, perfect. Much like issue 1, issue 2 really kind of sprang out of nowhere. And it'll be on the November ballot with very little debate. And I want to kind of walk through how we got to where we are and how we got to issue 2 being on our ballot. The genesis of it was in March of 2020, the village of Yellow Springs in Greene County passed a charter amendment that would allow for non-citizens to be able to vote in local elections. The municipality thought that as community members, taxpayers, teachers, employees, employers, they deserved a right to vote in local elections. Secretary of State LaRose, once that charter amendment passed, put a stop to that. And the first thing he did was send a letter to these county boards of elections, and I actually printed that letter out, and I want to quote it here. It says, "Without question, under Ohio law, as expressed in state statute and in Ohio's Constitution, a person must be a United States citizen to have the qualifications of an elector and be eligible to vote." So that seemed to put that issue to bed. It wasn't until May of 2022 where House Joint Resolution 4 surfaced, and that was the non-citizenship voting restriction amendment that we will see on our November ballot. Now, this may seem as kind of counterintuitive because, as the Secretary of State just said, it's already illegal in Ohio to cast a ballot as a non-citizen. However, there has been an argument put forward that under a very wonky rule in Ohio's Constitution known as home rule, that local municipalities do have that authority. That's the official story for why issue 2 is on the ballot. The ACLU of Ohio thinks that there's a different reason why that issue is on the ballot. I think, and the entire organization believes, that This is nothing but politics at its worst, politics at its dirtiest, and it's simply nothing more than a turnout mechanism for a particular class of voters across the state. That's why the ACLU of Ohio did not take a formal position on issue 2. We will not entertain and we will not put forward any notion that issue 2 should be taken seriously. It is political gamesmanship, it is scapegoating, it is fear-mongering, much like the members of this community have to face, the LGBTQ plus community. Instigations of suspicion, fear, a designation of being other. That's what issue 2 will serve in Ohio, to make anybody who doesn't look as if they're a citizen, who doesn't share Anglican heritage, is a suspicious voter. The ACLU of Ohio will not put forth any credence to an argument like that. That's why we encourage all Ohioans, when they're looking at their ballot on issue 2 in November, to think hard about what a vote on that amendment will do. Because again, it doesn't do anything about changing the law. The law is clear. You already have to be a citizen in Ohio to vote. This is simply politics at its worst, designed to sow division and suspicion among Ohioans. So that's a very broad overview. Please do think carefully, think critically about issue 2 before you step into your voting booth. And I see I'm down to my 1 minute. I'll save us that 1 minute. And thank you all very much.
Thank you, Colin, and you even raised the microphone so I don't have to take it out anymore. So next we are going to talk a little bit about the Secretary of State's race. First off, I just want to emphasize how important this office is. We have seen over the years the big lie really become something that has undermined the faith in our electoral system at large. So the Secretary of State is actually in charge of running our elections here in the state. And so they are also on the Redistricting Commission, which we've heard a little bit about already today. So without further ado, I am going to, well, let me first say, all of the Secretary of State candidates were invited. And we have one that has chosen to participate with us today, and that is Councilwoman Clark. So Councilwoman, please join us, and Raphael Davis-Williams will continue to be our eminent moderator here.
First, hello and welcome. Thank you. I want to thank my colleague Colin for covering me by giving us that minute back. Oh, we need to turn your mic on. Right, just right here. There we go. Yep.
I'm like Tay. I can't Taylor. I call him Tay. I'm from Allen County. We don't do all a bunch of technology.
Well, first we will again. I'll start with the opportunity for you to introduce yourself to the larger Ohio LGBTQ plus community.
All right. Thank you so much. First off, thank you so much for inviting me. I shouldn't have turned around. I don't know that I've been this high other than a plane, and the mic might slip. But that's why I'm 4'10". But certainly it's really, really nice, and it feels very good. It feels good, doesn't it, to be in a place where you just feel nice and safe and feel good? I am not always in those crowds these days, but I am Chelsea Clark. I'm a councilwoman in southwestern Ohio in Forest Park. I am a small business owner. I'm a 6th-generation farmer out of Allen County, rural, and I'm a mom of a 16 and a 14-year-old, which has been very right. She's like, no, that's why I was mothering from the back with Ubers and taking children, but it's been certainly a very interesting journey. My dad, back in 1964, he was 17, Birmingham, Alabama. Marched and was jailed. So you've got Martin Luther King writing the letter from a Birmingham jail, and you've got my dad arrested, sitting in a Birmingham jail for a peaceful protest. I say that because it gives me a very intimate knowledge and understanding of what's happening and what can happen again in terms of voting rights and the legislation being put forth that's got suppression tactics that are built in and silencing all sorts of different people. So that's one of the reasons that I am here, that is chief among them. I'm very concerned about what's happening to the state of this democracy. It is under attack, it is being threatened, and this is going to be our most critical election in our time, of our generation, and I wanted to make sure that I got involved. When I was at Miami University, I helped in starting our campus ACLU club, and that was interesting at Miami. I'm proud, love and honor, but it was an interesting time, and so I've always been a fighter and an advocate, working for business folks, women-led businesses, minority, and in different spheres in Ohio. And so breaking down barriers is exactly what needs to happen, and you need someone with the moral courage that can stand up against party politics in order to make sure that things are done fairly and equitably.
Thank you for that. And so let's dive in, and I don't want to relitigate or leave us steeped in the past, but there's the lingering question of whether or not there was voter fraud in the 2020 election. And let's be specific, in Ohio. Do you believe there was voter fraud and that the 2020 election was illegitimate?
I do not. I believe that it was legitimate. I mean, it is what it is, black and white, right?
So,
in fact, we had over 5.9 million people voting, and we had less than 100 intentionally fraudulent ballots. Now, I'm a data person. I own my own company, my own business. If you put that on a scale out of 5.9, it's infinitesimal. It doesn't even register on a bar graph.
So let's
or
talk,
a line graph.
Let's talk a bit more about that. I appreciate that. Let's talk a bit more about that, because I think it is important. So not only that there wasn't there wasn't measurable or significant fraud, there wasn't. So tell me then, why would how do you when there is this idea of having to change our voting system, or where legislators have introduced new voting laws, why is that necessary? And more importantly, as Secretary of State, how would you enter into that discussion?
Absolutely. So what he's really trying to say is, well, then why the hell are we having all these new laws proposed? In 2020, we had record numbers of people vote across this entire country from every single walk of life. We have folks in their 80s, 90s voting for the first time. Young people vote. People were giving up dollars because they were standing in line for so long to vote, because they were scared, they're concerned about the fate of this democracy in this country, and so they said, I want to participate. And only after all that civic engagement, then we had over 400 pieces of legislation being splashed around the country to limit people from actually exercising that right. Doesn't make any sense, does it? And I'm an educator, so I've got students and things like that. And if I pushed and did my classes, I teach STEM. I have a science, tech, engineering, and math education company. And if I taught them all these things about science and whatnot, and then they all come to the test and they all they utilize all the tools that they had, and then they were all successful. My class was 99% successful in passing the midterm exam, and then I say, well, there must be something wrong here. I must make that test more difficult and put it on a Saturday morning so the kids don't take it, all these different things. And that's what's happening. The reason it's happening is because I think we just had too many people dare to participate. And when they dare to participate, they know that the balances of power are in jeopardy. And what's happening is that you've got like Taylor, sorry, professional to call him Taylor in public. Like Taylor Sappington was saying, you've got people on this ballot that are working class folks. I'm under 40, and so a lot of these people have been in power in our state seats of power since we were children or not even here yet. And it is very, very difficult for them to relinquish that power, for them to share and to get out of the way, because they know that if they actually are allowing everybody to speak their mind or hearing from them, that threatens their positions. They're no longer going to be able to work with their high-powered donors to get things moved in their directions. And then you as we say in the old folks say, you messing up the apple cart.
So your opponent would say that
there was rampant voter fraud, and our elections are insecure, and we're very nervous and concerned about these fraudulent occurrences happening, and so therefore we must put in some more stipulations.
But let's explore that. So how then, if there are individuals who are on the voting rolls who haven't voted in 2 years, why shouldn't they be kicked off the rolls?
It's 6. It's 6 years, and there's multiple touch points that they have with them. What I disagree. So what you're talking about are purges. So purges is a process where we've got to remove people from the rolls because they pass away or they move, things like that. That's a way of verifying that someone's vote is accurate and can count. What I'm in disagreement with are unnecessary purges. So with the current system and Mr. LaRose, so in 2019, there are 400,000 folks to be removed from those rolls. That's a lot of people. When we had a review of that, an independent organization come in to review that, we found tens of thousands of those folks were in fact not ineligible to vote, that they had just previously voted in under a year. What we did find was, or what they did find rather, was there were targeting aspects to those purges. Communities, minority communities, they were Democrats to Republican 2-1, and they were young people, so mid to late 20s to mid 30s. And so we know that that's how I feel right now. Now scientifically, the fact that I can hear that all the way up here, like I'm like the sound travels, I'm all in my head right now in science on that one. I just was like, wow, just as exciting. But anyhow, so when you have those unnecessary purges, it's problematic because we know that those group of folks probably don't have the same ideas and outlooks and or experiences that most well-to-do people that are well-connected and been in this political space for 30 plus years have. There's going to be a serious disconnect, and when that happens, they're going to vote based on their experiences, which means they are now going to be in a minority. And so we've got this super majority, but they're really actually not.
So the Secretary of State has an enormous role in elections. As we have been talking about all evening, democracy, not necessarily partisan politics, but democracy as a concept can be, shifted one way or the other at the hands of the Secretary of State. What or why should LGBTQ folks or Ohioans in general trust you with that power?
You're absolutely right. So this this is one thing that I talk with people about. This is very much removed. This is far beyond Republican versus Democrat. That may be the tale that we'd like to, or they would like for you to, the narrative that they'd like for you to adopt and get nasty about. But that's not what this is. This is about democracy versus autocracy. This is about fact versus fiction. This is about truth versus lies. And this is about having somebody that has not a physical courage, but a moral courage that can stand up to folks that are threatening our democracy. We are the marquee democracy in the world. And far be it for us to just not get it right. One of the reasons I'm running is because we've got a lot of faith to restore in a system that's being intentionally broken. The system is being undermined so that people think that they don't have a way forward, that they are inconsequential, that their vote means nothing, and that is not true. Because like the saying always goes, right? If it didn't mean anything, they wouldn't be trying all these tricks and trying to make it so damned hard for you to not be able to have it. So that's one thing that you're going to get. You're also going to get transparency. So you've got somebody that's on the redistricting commission that passed unconstitutional maps, not once or twice or 7 times, they don't give a good gosh darn about no democracy or the Ohio Constitution when you do that. It had even gotten so bad, he had called the maps asinine, but yet still voted for them. He was sending messages to people that were state reps saying, well, hey, you can stay. That's like insider trading. You cannot do that. You've got to have integrity for this office because it's not red and it's not blue. It truly is a red, white, and blue office. It's got to be a place where your boards of elections feel safe. You've got high intimidation happening at our poll places and through these boards of elections. You've got to create a very safe environment. You've got to be a leader from the top and make sure you're protecting not just democracy and advancing it and making sure that we educate our poll workers on how to be LGBTQ friendly, right? When you've got folks that have come in that it may look different from the name versus what they think they're going to see, making sure that those things are in place. I know that in office as well, I'll be supporting. The Secretary of State also has the business registration filing underneath their umbrella. And so making sure that our business community is supported for LGBTQ practices and policies that are non-discriminatory. I'll be supporting those things and also making sure that the entire staff under the SOS umbrella, that we don't have discriminatory practices there either. And so I think I went just a tad bit away from I was still thinking about the sound waves, but those are the things that you'll get out of me as a Secretary of State and being very approachable and wanting to listen. One of the things right now is that there's a very closed door policy. So when certain BOEs members, especially Democratic ones, are wanting to bring things forward, it's very difficult to do that when you've got a very extremist individual in office, and he's using that office as a, wielding it as a weapon versus just following the law. Kicking people off, got candidates being kicked off of the ballot that legally did not need to be kicked off the ballot. So the amount of money that now they've got to spend to get back on, the Supreme Court's putting people back on ballot, the redistricting commission, all those illegal maps that have been, that he had voted on, that costs us. There is a cost to people that are not going to operate with integrity in these offices. Over $25 million for a special election August 2nd that nobody knew about. Nobody knew about it. You can ask 10 of your friends, and like 2 of them went like, oh yeah, okay, sure I did. Those things are important because we've got to be fiscally responsible too and make sure that we're educating and, again, advancing democracy, not just defending it.
So you mentioned all of those things that you mentioned point to our democracy being, threatened, that our politics right now are polarized. How do you bring unity? How do you re-engage voters in Ohio and get them enthusiastic about participating on a civic level?
Absolutely. That's one of the things that we've been. That's one. She's like, you're like Vanna. Like, damn. So that's so cute. That's one of the things that we've been doing as we go across the state. I'm in all sorts of different places on a daily basis, and people are getting energized and getting very concerned about what's happening. One, they don't know about these offices because civic education has gone downhill. We've not done a good job in the past decade of making sure that we've got folks that are educated about what is happening and how close to home that is. And so also seeing people, I can't stress enough how amazing this ticket is. You've got 2 women at the top of the ticket. You got my little brown skinned self. I'll be a first Black female Secretary of State in our history, even if I would be only the 10th woman to sit in one of the 6 state seats. Think about that. Right now, the 6 state seats are occupied by. They don't look like me. They're occupied by GOP, and they are older white men. Not that there's not a place for them, just not in all 6 state seats, as a representation of all of Ohio. That makes it very difficult because people don't see themselves. They're sure it's going to be difficult for you to advance policy when you don't have that that diversity there. And so the thing about this ticket is that we are all working folks. I literally, I go to work and then I get on the campaign trail, and then I go home, and I've been doing a lot of fast food because I can't cook these days. I don't have a maid or anybody to cook. So, we've been doing a lot of, pick up food because I've got kids. So we understand very intimately what is going on and how it's affecting me. Why I'm frustrated on a regular basis because I'm seeing you make decisions that don't have me in mind. And we are the majority. Us working folks are the majority, and people that are minorities and having to deal with all sorts of different issues, from starting a business and the obstacles therein. I'm in STEM. It's not been easy. We represent less than 6% nationally, so understanding and having that knowledge in the experiences with the obstacles and how to traverse them goes a long way when you get people that are wanting to advocate for everyone else and follow the law. I'm going to follow the law. Now, I'm not great at, I have a lead foot, but outside of that, I'm following, making sure that we administer fair and accessible elections is extremely important.
Okay, before Vanna Masucci over there tells me that we're going to have
She's like slick with it too. She's like if you don't look long enough, it's going to be gone.
Let's talk a wrap on inclusion. Yeah, that's
you want me to rap? I am not.
We have to wrap.
I'm just playing.
On inclusion for LGBTQ folks from the seat of the Secretary of State's office. How can those who are in the LGBTQ community look to, if you are so fortunate to be elected to that office?
We are all going to be fortunate.
How do we know we have an ally there?
Well, as I've already mentioned, I've been an ally and doing that work on Miami University's campus, so that goes back. But like I already said, so making sure that you've got non-discrimination clauses and policies, and you uphold them. It's one thing to have the policies, and it's one thing to have those things in place, but it's another thing to create an environment where people actually feel safe, where people feel like they are able to be their authentic selves, and they're celebrated as well. And there's no, they're not being left out of the conversation or out of the ability to move forward in their careers. That goes a long way when you're talking about someone in leadership that manages the entire, effectively the entire, all 88 boards of elections. So there's a standard that has to be set, and I'll be making sure that we set that standard. As things evolve, like I said, with, distinctions and things like that, where poll workers are coming into play and things are changing in that regard and mindsets, there's got to be some education too. So making sure that we're supporting, or I'll be supporting those educational efforts when we're talking about our poll workers, because we're going to treat everybody with dignity and respect. I don't care what your preconceived, whatever it is, these people are, nobody is going to come and to be mistreated or feel like they're not included in this process. That is not going to be acceptable, and there will be consequences for that.
Chelsea, thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman Clark and Raphael, for guiding us through here. We have our last executive office, state-level executive office next. I do want to reiterate, we invited Frank LaRose to join us. They chose not to. We also invited Dave Yost and his campaign to join us. We also offered a surrogate option. So Jeff Crossman had a scheduling conflict, but the minority leader, of course, Allison Russo, is actually going to be speaking on his behalf. Now, Allison has been appropriately prompted that she will be expected to have real answers to hard questions still. But we are excited to have her, and we're excited to talk about Attorney General. The Attorney General, the easiest way to explain it, it's the attorney for the state of Ohio. And so that person's political disposition and legal theories has a really big impact on what advice the state of Ohio is getting and what kind of priorities the legal department at the state of Ohio focuses on. So I will welcome now Minority Leader Allison Russo and Raphael to join us once more.
Well, thank you again for joining us on behalf of Jeff Crossman. So I will, again, we'll kind of start with an overview just to introduce those who may not be familiar either with the Attorney General's office, which I think we, I forget,
Microphone would be nice.
I forget that too.
I just assume everybody can hear me.
But why is Jeff the best candidate for this for Attorney General?
Well, I think first and foremost, I mean, let's remember that the Attorney General is not only the top law enforcement official of the state, but also the Office of Civil Rights falls under the Attorney General's office. So, I can talk about Jeff Crossman. He is a colleague. He and I actually came into the legislature together almost 4 years ago. He has been just a relentless advocate, not only for the people of Ohio and fighting for their rights and making sure that consumer rights are protected, but also fighting for transparency in government. And, he is not someone who believes in right or left. He is about what is right versus wrong. And, Jeff grew up in a working class family in Wickliffe, Ohio, up in Northeast Ohio, went to law school, was a practicing and has been a practicing attorney, both in-house counsel as well as legal practice. And then he also served on Parma City Council for a number of terms before he came into the legislature, where he has been on our Criminal Justice Committee, our Civil Justice Committee, and really has, I joke that he's the bulldog sometimes on the floor. I give Jeff Crossman, not only does he speak out, for the people of Ohio, particularly around the issue of civil rights and consumer protections, but also on this issue of corruption and making sure that there is transparency in our government from the top to the bottom. And, I give him full credit. He really is the person who took the Republicans to task and was responsible for making sure that Larry Householder was finally expelled from the Ohio House of Representatives after the HB6 scandal.
So thank you for that. We definitely appreciate it. There's a lot with the Attorney General's office, more than we'll be able to get through in the amount of time we have. But let's start with the concept, or this ongoing battle about what's being called divisive concepts.
Yeah.
And the reason I raise that first is because our current Attorney General, Mr. Yost, filed, federal lawsuits, regarding these. Where does Mr. Crossman come down on that? How do you believe that, whether we are teaching history about enslaved people, or giving those who are of us in the LGBTQ community the opportunity to just simply show up as our authentic selves at our workplaces? What is the distinction between Mr. Crossman and our current attorney?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, let me be clear that these pieces of legislation, so-called divisive concepts bills that we have seen in the legislature, and there have been a couple of different versions of this, really they are nothing more than legalized bigotry. And Jeff Crossman has remained firmly opposed to those pieces of legislation. I will say he views this, I think, from both the perspective of someone who believes in making sure that this state is inclusive for all of our citizens, regardless of who you love, where you live, what your skin color is, but also, as the husband of a teacher in public schools, it's also about making sure that our students are, taught the full history. America, we all love this country, but we make this country better when we ensure that we learn from our mistakes in history, and having open and honest discussions in our education system about what that is important. Jeff has also been a co-sponsor of the Ohio Fairness Act for the last two General Assemblies that he and I have been in the General Assembly. And, you know, I think he stands firm with that. We want to make sure that all spaces, whether we're talking about workplaces, we're talking about schools, we're talking about, housing, that those are places that are open and inclusive for all of Ohio's citizens, and that includes with our LGBTQ plus community.
I appreciate that. What do you say to those who say, you know, there are parents out there who have earnest concerns about whether or not their, you know, first or second grader is introduced to concepts of sexuality or sexual orientation sooner than they should be, and that this is just a matter of protecting them? How would Mr. Crossman come down on that one?
Well, first and foremost, you know, again, I think, I will just say personally, I'm the parent of a kindergarten student, a middle school student, and a high school student. And I will tell you that, I am in the public schools, and I know that Jeff knows this because his wife is a public school teacher. That, you know, children are, these topics are being, if they're being discussed, it is appropriate according to their age. But here's the reality. We have got families of all different makeups in our schools, and we have children. And we need to make sure that these classrooms are inclusive for all of those children, that they are spaces that are conducive to learning and welcoming for all students and all families. And, you know, I think that is, if you talk to our schools and if you look at the curriculum, if you talk to our teachers, that is what our schools and our teachers are working towards. And, having these fights about, what's going on in the classroom. I mean, frankly, they are meant to, they're just frankly not accurate and accurately reflecting what is happening in the classroom. If you are actually in the classroom, talking to teachers and parents and families who are experiencing this. And, I think, again, that Jeff Crossman will be an attorney general that ensures that the civil rights of every single citizen in this state, regardless of who they love or where they come from, will be protected.
So, unfortunately, we're going to move to another rather weighty topic, the subject of abortion and reproductive rights. The Dobbs decision overturning Roe has roiled the country. I don't think that's a partisan thing to say, that it is at a place where it is, the lines are being drawn. As Attorney General of the state of Ohio, how does Jeff Crossman ensure the reproductive rights for those who are not just, again, in the LGBTQ community, but Ohioans in general?
Sure. Well, let me just say this first and foremost. Jeffrey Crossman is a firm advocate and supporter of reproductive rights. He has certainly fought back against the 6-week abortion ban. That was actually a piece of legislation that was brought to the floor in our first term. Within the first couple of months, he spoke out firmly against that legislation, which, as many of you know, was actually put on hold through the court system. And the day that the Dobbs decision came out, it was actually Attorney General Yost who immediately filed to lift that and allowed that 6-week abortion ban to go into place immediately. That was directly the result of the actions of our Attorney General Yost. And as we've seen what has played out since then, we have doctors at hospitals who are treating patients who daily are encountering situations where doctors are unsure how to proceed with life-saving care with those patients because of the ambiguity. By the way, ambiguity that we knew existed because we heard all of this in committee when we were debating this piece of legislation. Doctors told us a couple of years ago that this was going to be the consequence of this. And that is because of the lack of guidance from the Attorney General's office. And we see victims of sexual assault, including a 10-year-old girl, having to flee the state of Ohio to seek what is appropriate and necessary care, to seek abortion care after a brutal rape. And we have our Attorney General, Yost, who goes on national television and questions the very existence of that girl and whether or not that actually happened. And by the way, that was a couple of months ago that he did that, and in the last week has dug into that statement and continues to say, why do I need to apologize for that? So that is who we're talking about. And I will tell you that Jeff Crossman will be firmly supportive of any woman, any person in this state who needs to seek necessary care or needs the clarification from Ohio law. The other thing that I just want to make clear is, as we think about moving forward, the issue of ballot initiatives and the language that goes onto the ballot for those initiatives, ultimately the sign-off happens in the Attorney General's office. And so I ask all of you, who do you want giving that final approval, Dave Yost or Jeff Crossman? And I picked Jeff Crossman.
Another weighty issue, I thank you for that. Another weighty issue is Title IX. The current Attorney General actually filed a lawsuit regarding the ability of transgender youth to participate in, sports. I don't want to ask the obvious question, which is whether or not Jeff Crossman would support that. But more importantly, how do you protect the transgender youth who are there, who are suffering attacks, based on, not on anything that they've chosen, but just on being the human beings that they are?
Listen, and this is where I'm looking at my notes because I am not an attorney. But this is where the Bostock decision that has gone before the U.S. Supreme Court, by the way, a decision that was supported even by Trump-appointed justices on the Supreme Court, says that these protections extend to sexual orientation as well. And we now have an Attorney General who, as you noted, is suing the federal government, which not only now puts at risk our LGBTQ plus youth, but all youth and their ability to access free and reduced lunch services. 1 in 6 children in this state lives in poverty. And to me, that just defies logic that we have an Attorney General who is actively seeking to remove the ability for us to get free and reduced lunches because of the guidance that the federal government has put forward, which, by the way, is supported by the Supreme Court decision. And so, again, this goes back to, I think, the Attorney General that Jeff Crossman will be is, I think, looking at the lens of what protects the civil rights of all Ohio citizens and children and families, regardless of who they love or where they live. And the reality is we do not have a current Attorney General who thinks through that lens. We see him time after time seek these lawsuits against the federal government for purely partisan and political purposes that do real damage to all children.
And following right up on that, how would Jeff Crossman be different?
Well, I think he will be different in that at the end of the day, I think he will evaluate through the lens of what best protects the rights of all Ohio citizens, including our LGBTQ plus youth in our schools. I mean, the reality is, time after time, we're seeing not only from our state elected officials, but also at the State House, continuous attacks, which, by the way, Jeff Crossman has opposed in the legislature, continuous attacks against our LGBTQ youth in our schools. And I think he will be different in that he will look at this as, his role is to protect those civil rights, not to undermine them.
Thank you. So, as Attorney General, again, I'll go back to a question I asked Chelsea. Our politics are very clearly we're at a divided place right now. how could Jeff, you mentioned he's the bulldog on the floor, but how do you switch from that? How does he switch from that role into being a role where he is the Attorney General for those folks who did not vote for him?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, at the end of the day, I think what I know about Jeff as a person, as a legislator, and what I anticipate he will be as an Attorney General, he doesn't look at this as partisan, right versus left. I mean, at the end of the day, this is about what is right and what is wrong, and what is best for the citizens of Ohio that he represents. And I think that is all that we ask of any public servant, is that at the end of the day, they work for the citizens, not for partisan interests, not for ideologies, but for the citizens that they represent.
How do you elevate, or how would Jeff elevate a more, dial down the ratchet down the temperature in the role of Attorney General? And I ask that in the context of the current Attorney General hasn't exactly dialed down the temperature. So how would or is it necessary? Do you think he thinks it's necessary, or are where we are as a society, this kind of tension, is that a good tension, or do we need to dial it
Well,
down?
I think it depends on the circumstances. I mean, at the end of the day, I want an Attorney General, and I think Jeff will be an Attorney General, who is on the side of the law and the citizens. And the reality of what we have seen over the last several years from our State House has really been this culture of corruption and lack of accountability to people. I mean, we've seen it through corruption scandals. We've seen it through a defiance of following the will of the voters in the redistricting process. And I think that I want an Attorney General, and Jeff is the person I believe who will be this person, who, again, he's fighting for the law and the rule of law. And, if I think, again, depends on the circumstances. If you've got folks in government and state government who are not being accountable to the law or to the citizens, then I think it's absolutely appropriate that be called out and that people be held accountable for that.
Do you think, or just actually kind of not necessarily? I keep saying you. It's hard to make sure.
No, that's okay.
that I'm in the right space. From a philosophical standpoint, if there are concerns from the Attorney General is the top law. We hear that top law officer. How does that position protect when you say all of the civil rights? But there's tensions there. There are real tensions that are there. So how do you drill past those or get past those? To bring the temperature down.
Yeah, well, I think it's, again, it is also about evaluating, fairness. There is a sense of fairness and looking at, at number one, what is the law? And there certainly may be circumstances where the Attorney General may not agree with what the law is that has been passed, especially from this legislature that we have currently. But it's also looking at, what is fair, how can you offer clarification, and at the end of the day, what does the least amount of harm to people, whether we're talking about their civil rights, we're talking about consumer protections. I think there are a number of ways that, I see Jeff, again, because he doesn't look at things as right versus left. I mean, it really is, what is the right thing to do and what is fair.
So you also touched on this. It's kind of a little bit of a different subject, but you mentioned HB 6 and the corruption. Mm-hmm. How would Jeff Crossman have prevented that?
Yeah. Well, listen, I think that, it's hindsight is 2020 here. There have been a number of recommendations for how we can reduce public corruption in the state of Ohio, which, by the way, we're ranked number 1 in public corruption in the United States. A number of things that Jeff has supported during his time in the legislature, primarily adding accountability adding things like campaign finance reform, adding more transparency in the contracting processes as well. He's actually sponsored a number of pieces of legislation in this space. But here's the thing, at the end of the day with House Bill 6, we have the federal case that is ongoing and we expect it to go to trial in January. There are also state laws that have been broken, and there is the opportunity for a state investigation, and these individuals should be held accountable by our state attorney general. And that has just simply not happened. And what I know of Jeff and how much he has really push this issue of accountability, particularly for House Bill 6. I would imagine as Attorney General, he will pursue that investigation if it's appropriate and pursue state charges if it's appropriate.
Thank you, Allison. I'm gonna steal 30 seconds again and ask you one more question,
yes,
because I think it's
ahead.
important when we think about reforming our cash bail system. That's one of the issues that the Attorney General could actually weigh in on and make a difference. So where would Jeff come down, or where is he on the current bills that are pending that would essentially not have someone like my householder be able to pay his way out of jail simply because he has the means, where someone who's done something far less egregious, is sitting there losing their job and their home and their.
So Jeff supports cash bail reform without a doubt, and he has been very active in the conversations. Many people may not know there's actually been bipartisan legislation in this space that has been debated, has had several committee hearings that Jeff has been participating in reforming this system. I will say. I think Jeff supports issue 1, but also recognizes that this is not a perfect solution to this issue, because as you noted, simply requiring cash bail does not ensure public safety. And the concern is that the current issue really is, I call it the hatchet when a surgical scalpel is required, and that surgical scalpel has been the bipartisan bill that we've been hearing in the House. And I hope that bill continues to go forward and gets passed eventually, because I believe that is the more refined solution. But Jeff certainly supports cash bail reform, as does the majority of citizens. But the devil is in the details here. And while he supports issue 1, it is not a perfect solution.
Thank you. We could go on, but thank you so much. I appreciate you. Thank you, Allison, for coming in on behalf of Jeff Crossman.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Wow, wow, wow. That has been amazing. I want to give a really big thank you to all of our candidates that we have spoken to this evening. Candidate for Governor Nan Whaley, candidate for Auditor of State Taylor Sappington, candidate for Secretary of State Chelsea Clark, and Minority Leader Allison Russo here on behalf of candidate for Attorney General Jeff Crossman. We are going to be taking a brief intermission so we can allow folks to get some beverages and some refreshments, and we'd ask everyone that's here with us to meet us back here at 7:20 so that we can get started again with our candidates for U.S. Senate as well as the Supreme Court of Ohio. Thank you so much, and we will be right back. Hello, and welcome back for the second part of Equality Ohio's first ever statewide nonpartisan candidate forum. My name is Siobhan Boyd Nelson, she, her pronouns, and I'm so happy to welcome you back here as we jump in with our next candidate. And also I'm gonna welcome Elena Jokum, our executive director here, to introduce the next office that we are going to be talking about. Elena?
Thank you so much, Siobhan, and thank you to everyone in our audience and everyone who is watching here. And first, I am so excited to introduce our next moderator. We are so honored to have tonight Colleen Marshall, who is the anchor at NBC4 at 6 p.m., 7 p.m., and 11 p.m., and made adjustments just so that she could be with us tonight. She's also the host of a weekly political program, NBC4's The Spectrum. She is a member of Ohio's legal bar and a practicing attorney, and she has received so many incredible awards for reporting and her dedicated community service, including 4 Emmys, among dozens of others. We are so grateful for your time here tonight, asking the hard questions of our candidates in this nonpartisan forum. So let's get started to that, folks. We've been hearing from many of our state elected offices tonight. Now we are turning to the U.S. Senate. And we know our U.S. Senate is so important. It is a representation of all Ohioans. With only 2 senators from our state, the U.S. Senate plays a unique role in representing our entire population down for us in Washington. This cycle, with the control of the U.S. Senate hanging in the balance, every vote matters, and this race is very important. So I want to just present a disclaimer again. Both parties who were running for Senate were invited. We reached out multiple times, and we offered the opportunity for a surrogate if our candidates were not able to attend. That is, in fact, the case here, and so we are honored tonight to have Taylor Sappington, who is going to be the surrogate for candidate Tim Ryan for U.S. Senate. Welcome, Taylor. Thank you so much again, Colleen.
Thank you all for having me. Well, let's get a good start. Is this on? Smooth as glass. Thanks everybody for having me, and I am happy that we emphasize that this is and was invited to be a bipartisan event. There are other events that I will be involved in that do have 2 candidates, but to be honest with you, during this election cycle, most of them have only 1, including a gubernatorial conversation at the Columbus Metropolitan Club next week, where only Nan Whaley will appear. And I know you are a surrogate for Tim Ryan, but I'm going to start out with that question. Why do you think the debate process, which is so important to democracy, is being left by the wayside this election cycle?
Well, really great question. Thank you, everybody, for having me. It is a privilege to be back. Tim Ryan is very sorry he couldn't make this event. And then I'm very privileged to fill in for such a great candidate. And then I'm also very honored to be talking here with Colleen Marshall, who I told earlier this cycle.
It's not that exciting.
It is very exciting. It is very exciting. Who has presented the news to me for as long as I can remember, so thank you.
Oh, and thank you for that.
I did not meant that way, of course. So
I have shoes older than you, by the way.
Oh my goodness, smooth as glass, like you said, right? So, I think the question was, why do we think it's happening, right?
Right.
So why do we think this is happening? So one of the reasons, to me, that I believe it's happening is democracy sort of shivers and shakes right now. Our view of what we took for granted in this country, things that Tim Ryan's been fighting for an entire career, we can't take them for granted any longer. And frankly, if I can be pointed, one of the reasons that people like J.D. Vance and Mike DeWine don't want to debate their opponents is because they're worried they're going to lose them, right? Because we've got really good candidates in Congressman Ryan and Mayor Whaley, and they would do quite well in a debate. They're sharp as tacks. So I think it's twofold. Democracy hurts, and people are taking advantage of that. And 2, we've got really good candidates that their opponents don't want to face.
I know you are speaking on behalf of another candidate when you speak here for Tim Ryan, but what has he done? What can you point to in his record that has been supportive of the LGBTQI community? What has he done that you think voters who are tuning in tonight should know?
Yeah, so to me, some of the most important things Congressman Ryan has been party to are things like his sponsorship, co-sponsorship of the Equality Act in Congress. He's been an advocate. He's been passionate about it. I think, I I look at things like his advocacy for getting rid of the filibuster. He doesn't want to just take on the filibuster because it's terrible or it's got a bad name. It's got both of those things. But he wants to take on the filibuster for two primary reasons. He wants to codify Roe, and he wants to codify the right to marry who you love. And he thinks those issues are too important to leave on the table because of archaic Senate rules. And so I think those are good examples of his advocacy.
You know, over the years, I've heard Democrats be critical of people who are single-issue voters, who vote only because it's pro-life. But this year, the shoe's on the other foot. And I think there are Democrats who are currying votes on a single issue and hoping especially young women go to the polls because of the Roe v. Wade being overturned. What do you say about that? Do you think this is the year for a single issue voter? Should we vote only because of the LGBTQ issues that we agree with, only because of our stance on abortion? What do you want voters to think about when they go to the booth?
So this is why I think you're so great, Colleen, because this is a great question. Really, I mean, this is a pointed question. I actually don't think, and I don't believe Congressman Ryan thinks, that it has just become a single issue on the other foot. What has happened is that we've got real visceral attacks on the freedom to choose and freedom to safe, accessible abortion right now, right this summer. It's happened. And so what's happening is we've got folks across this country, across this state, who are very concerned about their freedom under attack right now. But at its core, it's not just a person's access to abortion that they're thinking about, right? They're worried about, we've got women and folks all over the state who are worried about being basically dressed down to just something less than human, right? That the Supreme Court looks at them as just somebody who's got to just bring a pregnancy to term, not a human being with passions and likes and a career and a family and all these things. So at its core, it's deeper than just being a single issue of access to abortion. I think people are so concerned because they're worried they're not going to be seen as full citizens. And that's exactly, I know for a fact how Tim Ryan sees it. And that's exactly why he's so animated on this issue.
This is a state's issue when we talk about censorship in the schools. We are seeing a growing number of local school boards that are getting a lot of pressure to remove books from libraries and to restrict access to literature for students if it's what, you know, a small group of people doesn't approve of. Not necessarily the librarians and the teachers, but parents and people who are therefore then elected to the school board. It is a state's issue, but do you think there's something on the federal level that Tim Ryan and other members on Capitol Hill can do to maybe take away the right of censorship at the local level?
So good question. I mean, I know Tim Ryan is an advocate. He doesn't want to ban books. Or pass bans. He wants to put books in schools, quite frankly. He's a strong advocate for education, educational funding, for teachers, and at its core, dignity, because that's what education does. It's the great equalizer. It can give a person a lifetime of dignity, right? Is there a federal role? Surely through Congress and the Department of Education, there very well could be legislation. I'll be honest, I don't know personally of any legislation on the table that impacts on this issue, but it does get a little complicated, just like you said, because with state control and local control, there could be some complications. But I can tell you, with the way J.D. Vance talks and acts and presents himself, I'd much rather myself and hopefully Ohio would much rather have Tim Ryan deciding when that hypothetical bill comes to the table. We'd much rather Tim Ryan voting on it than J.D. Vance.
Well, certainly there could be federal implications to some of the issues that transgender students are facing, if for no other reason than Title IX. So as we look at restrictions people are putting, and harassment, frankly, that transgender students are getting, And I don't think from their other students, from the students who are their age and in their peer group, but from the government. What is the federal role there? What could you see Tim Ryan doing to maybe protect transgender students who are facing an uphill battle right now?
Yeah, so this came up in my last session, right? Because when you have politicians, and whether they be local or national, when you have them attacking people for being simply who they are, there's going to be a real cost to that. And it's not just the cost of division or things that are less measurable. There's a human cost. There's people who struggle deeply. There's people who we lose to suicide, and we have got to reject people who bring a politics of hate and oppression, quite frankly. But just like you said, they're definitely, I'll give an example. So I'm the Nelsonville City Auditor, and this is going to seem way off. But the Nelsonville receives a ton of money from the USDA to help update their sewer plant. And the feds have a rule that says if you're going to take and receive all of this money from the USDA, from the federal government, to redo your infrastructure, there are some things we're interested in. And they want to know you spent the money right and spent the money where you said you would. But there's some other things too. And so they check in on things like our ADA accessibility. Do we have options for citizens who might want to pay their utility bill, who are blind or deaf? Or do you have other options like that? And so I think one example here could be is that if you're going to receive federal funding, there might be some requirements here. Are you serving all of your customers? Customers is not the right term, citizens. Are you serving all of your citizens the way they deserve and equally? And so cities have to undergo that when we receive federal funds. I'm sure there are some requirements for schools, but that definitely, to me, could be one way to take that issue on.
You know, here in Columbus, we've seen, as you see nationwide, there is a higher rate of homelessness among transgender youth and among LGBTQ youth than we would like to see. What federal resources could be marshaled and sent to cities like Columbus who are dealing with these issues?
So we have seen from the two parties great examples of what the feds can do for issues like this. In 2017, we saw the absurd passed or voted on and approved by our own senator, Rob Portman, absurd tax cuts costing trillions of dollars. And the reason I'm going to start here is then to move on to things like what Tim Ryan passed, like the American Rescue Plan, the CHIPS Act, the infrastructure bill. We have seen in several different ways recently the immense resources of the federal government, right? And the amount of help there can be if we just get the right folks in there, right? And so Tim Ryan is the type of person who believes no more tax cuts, no more trillions of dollars wasted on ultra wealthy or corporate tax cuts. Instead, why not pass things that actually help folks who are struggling, who are trying to get a job, who are workers, who are regular folks who just got some problems to solve, right? Through things like the American Rescue Plan, he knows and gets what can be done. And quite frankly, Congress has the ability to do the same thing on issues just like this, on homelessness right here in Columbus, on LGBTQ homelessness, which is a statistic that particularly stands out when you have things like divided families on the issue. Congress, more so than the city of Columbus, has the ability and the resources to do something about it and to send those funds our way, excuse me. And Tim Ryan absolutely will be an advocate for that.
Well, he's been in Congress now for 2 decades. Healthcare issues have been coming up, I'm sure, the entire time he's been there, but gender-affirming healthcare is very costly. Nothing has been done on the federal level yet for that. Is that something he has fought for or something he would fight for? It's a really financial burden for young people who are looking not just for the surgeries, but for the medications that are gender supporting. Would he and has he supported that?
So this is a great question. So I know from my experience that Tim Ryan is an advocate and a fighter for access to health care, no matter its cost. because healthcare in general is very expensive, right? It's very expensive, whether you're just doing routine things just to live your life, or if you've got a bad diagnosis or something else. It's very expensive. And so Tim has time and time again shown us in Congress with his votes, he's shown us on the campaign trail, and he'll show us as his senator that he wants everyone to have access to health care. And I'll be honest, I haven't heard him specifically talk about it in this specific instance. When we're talking about gender-affirming healthcare. But when you're talking about getting healthcare for everyone and helping everyone, I imagine, as some clever folks down on my side of the state say, y'all means all, right? So I imagine when you say healthcare for everyone, it means everyone.
I want to ask you about some economic issues as well. Can you see a role for, and would he be supportive of tax breaks and economic support for LGBTQ businesses? You know, we know that there are things like the Lavender Report, and certainly the LGBT community supports itself and is supportive of others in the business. But should there be tax breaks in the way that there are for other minorities that would give them maybe access to federal contracts and special tax breaks?
Yeah, so absolutely, he not only should, if he hasn't talked about specifically this carve-out, but I know Tim has talked extensively about passing a middle-class tax cut and small business tax cut as one of his first priorities, because he personally believes and politically believes that those at the top should pay their fair share, and that, quite frankly, they haven't been, because people like J.D. Vance keeps cutting it. And forcing the rest of us to pay for it through other methods. And if we're not paying for it, then the Republicans have been just cutting the service in general, cutting it right out. So yeah, he absolutely, Tim Ryan wants to get in there. I know if you've seen any of his millions of ads, right? Or if you've seen him in person, or if you read his website, the first priority he has talked about is a tax cut across the board for middle-class wage earners and for small businesses, which would impact a huge swath of Ohio.
I want to ask you about community safety. Chris Kozat is here from the Buckeye Region Anti-Violence Organization, who she's dedicated much of her life to keeping people safe in the community and also keeping track of how many people in the gay community have been assaulted because of who they are. What's the role of the federal government in community safety, in keeping neighborhoods safe and having access to support for people who maybe aren't safe?
So I mentioned this earlier about being able to live with dignity, right? Tim Ryan, myself, and many of us here believe that you should be able to live with dignity. And then eventually, a different economic issue, retire with dignity. Tim has a history of the role of the federal government is to make sure two things. One is that if somebody does something like this, there should be a consequence for it. And I'm specifically thinking about like hate crimes legislation and other penalties that Tim Ryan and others have supported and fought for. But the second thing is making sure that there's actual delivery, right? Because you can have something on the books, but if you don't actually get it, if you don't actually do it, if the local authority doesn't go through with it, then what good is it? And so there has to be a mechanism, much like the data you just talked about, making sure on those cases with those individuals who have suffered, making sure that the process laid out was actually followed through, and what changes need to be made to go through to make sure it doesn't happen again. And quite frankly, it's a huge issue. We see the violence, we hear about it, we see folks who just because they're just trying to live their lives have been targeted. And we're all in agreement, right? It's got to stop, and there's got to be a role for it. And sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm cutting you off, but there's one last thing I want to say on this, which is that J.D. Vance, the Republican candidate for Senate, has used problematic, is an understatement, disgusting language, like the phrase groomers, and using language about LGBTQ folks that causes a scenario, a societal scenario with those people where we all feel divided and hurt and leaves them susceptible, right? Leaves all of us susceptible.
I
And so
wanna-
you can't elect folks like that if we're going to take on this issue.
I do want to remind everyone that we did invite a surrogate or Mr. Vance to be here as well, because that it's important for everyone to know. And I want to thank Taylor Sappington for coming here tonight and representing the interest of Mr. Ryan. So, Congressman Ryan, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Taylor, for coming up not once but twice today. You are just helping us out so much. I am now going to introduce Jeff Wensing from Ohio Education Association, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the Ohio Board of Education races that are happening this year. This is something that we added on to our agenda because we know how important this is and that it's something that a lot of people don't really know much about. So Jeff is going to help fill us in.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Yes, my name is Jeff Wensing. I'm a 26-year high school math teacher from Parma City Schools. Most of those years were at Parma Senior High School. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm currently serving as the vice president of the Ohio Education Association. So that's Colleen Marshall right there. Everybody know that's Colleen Marshall? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the makeup of the State Board of Education. There are 19 members of the board. Out of those 19 members, 11 of them are elected and 8 of them are appointed. So out of the 11 elected members, we have 33 Senate districts in Ohio. 3 Senate districts make up 1 State Board of Education district. We know what's been taking place with the maps. One would argue that the current Board of Education districts are also unconstitutional because we know what's happened with the maps. Out of those appointed members, the 8 appointed members, they're appointed by the governor, and then they are confirmed by the Ohio Senate. All the seats are, whether it's elected or appointed, are 4 years in length, and you can serve 2 terms regardless of whether appointed or elected. So what is the responsibility of the State Board of Education? Well, really they're the oversight. They set a lot of policy. They're very important. You know, the things that they deal with, just to name a few, are teacher licensure, adopting the standards for the local schools. So those are important topics. We all know that there is local control in Ohio. So with local control, the State Board of Education passes the standards, but the locals then adopt the curriculum that align to those standards. So again, very important role. Those are just a few things. I could also throw in teacher evaluation, OTES evaluation, Ohio Teacher Evaluation System to boot. So when you look at that State Board of Education, what do you want to see in a state board member? Well, there are a lot of management styles, but what you would like to see in a state board member is that they support public education. We have some board members that, in my belief, may not be supportive of public education. We have a diverse population here in Ohio. We want our schools to be well-funded. We want our schools to be well-staffed. We want our kids to be able to think critically and be able to be college and career ready. And in order to do that, you have to teach the whole child. So what the kids in Worthington need might be a little bit different than the kids in Youngstown need. What the kids in Westlake need might be a little bit different than what the kids in Dayton need. But it's the state's responsibility, the State Board of Education, to make sure all of our students are supported and they're provided what they need to be successful. So you've seen what's going on at local school boards. The state school board seems lately not to be too much different. You could say there's a bit of a culture war possibly bubbling over at the State Board of Education. So it seems like the State Board might take a step forward. They take 1 or 2 steps back, unfortunately, lately. I think a step forward that they took was after what we saw with the murder of George Floyd. They passed a resolution to condemn racism. Great job, State Board of Education. You made all of our students, especially our minority population, feel supported in their local school districts. However, a year later, here comes a step back. The state school board then rescinded their resolution that condemned racism. Recently, in regards of testing, We always are advocating for less time for standardized testing and more time to teach our students and give them what they need. There's a third grade English language arts test. Currently, you have to administer the English language arts test in the third grade twice. It's called the third grade reading guarantee. And if that student doesn't pass the third grade reading guarantee cut score, they don't meet that cut score, they are retained. All the research shows that retention of a third grader doesn't work. Blaming and shaming our students doesn't work. There's a resolution that says we will roll back the testing to just one application, and we will allow the retention piece, that decision to be made by the educators. Great. No longer retention based on a test score. However, now that we've seen that, the same person, Brendan Shea, has presented another resolution that would recommend local school districts to totally disregard Title IX. Don't follow Title IX. Again, tacking our trans students, not allowing them to be engaged in sports, and not preventing them to use some of the building facilities. And then one other thing I'll say about Brendan Shea that he said at the state board, he believes that our students that are said to be furries. I don't have to tell you what furries are, but this is an urban myth, an urban legend. He believes and said at the meeting that our students are asking for and getting litter boxes to be placed in classrooms, and that they are relieving themselves in front of the educators and students in the classroom. Come on, right? That just does not exist. That is an urban myth, an urban legend, and nobody will believe that. So in closing, what we need are logical, well thought out school board members. They are currently running in districts 2, 3, 4, 9, and 10. Please research these races. We need candidates elected that support our students, support our educators, and support public education for the whole child all across the state. Thank you.
And if you all will be patient with us for just a couple more minutes, Justice Bruner is scheduled to come up next, and we are still just making sure that she can find her way all right. But we've got two other eminent Supreme Court candidates in our audience as well who will be joining us as well. So hang tight just for a couple minutes.
Welcome back, everyone. We're so grateful to have this space tonight. Just a reminder, we've said it a couple times, but I'll reiterate it again. Each candidate here tonight, this is a nonpartisan forum. We are so grateful to have our candidates here speaking of their own voice, of their own issues. None of these are the positions of Equality Ohio Education Fund. We're just happy to be providing this nonpartisan space for our candidates. We've heard from statewide offices. We have heard from the U.S. Senate. Now we are turning our focus to the Ohio Supreme Court, which the state of Ohio elects. Very, very important role for our judiciary, for our legal system, for our rights. And specifically, our next forum is going to focus on the role of the Chief Justice. The Chief Justice plays a particular and unique role on the Ohio Supreme Court. It is not just another justice position. All are very important, but the chief has particular powers and duties and responsibilities. These include the ability to create task forces, commissions, direct resources to areas of our law that may need extra examination. They set the tone and tenor for the court as a whole, and the individual in the Chief Justice position will also weigh in on important administrative rules and how the legal profession of Ohio is run as a whole. So this unique position is getting specific attention. We will then bring up a panel of our candidates for the judiciary. So with that, I am very grateful to introduce candidate Justice Jennifer Bruner to the stage. Again, we are a nonpartisan forum. We have invited all candidates for the Chief Justice position. We also allowed for surrogates to be here. We're thrilled that Jennifer Bruner is with us tonight. Thank you so much again, Colleen. Let's get to it.
Thank you and welcome to Justice Bruner. And as she said, I know that you cannot answer questions about specific cases that might be before the court or be pending before the court. And I know this because I've tried to ask her before, and she has not answered those questions. So let me ask you this. You are in, the Chief Justice is in a role not only of directing and managing the court, but deciding different initiatives and maybe social outreach and education programs that will be run in courts throughout the state. Can you see in that role anything that you might be doing that would be supportive of the LGBTQ community here in Ohio?
Absolutely, and I'll start from where we have already taken some action. Actually, Equality Ohio was one of the parties that came to, by letter to the Chief Justice, now currently Maureen O'Connor, and said with the federal district court decision holding unconstitutional the State Department of Health's decision that transgender persons could not change their gender on their birth certificate, groups like Equality Ohio said, could you come up with a way that we could have a uniform way to go to the probate judges around the state, get the order that we need, and take that to the Department of Health so that we can make our birth certificate reflect who we really are. And the chief immediately set up a task force on that, included folks with the Department of Health, a lot of probate judges, and in fairly short order, there was a form that was developed that would be used by the probate judges around the state that the State Department of Health said was found to be acceptable. And it was taken then to the 7 justices to vote on this, and we voted not to submit it for public comment so that it could go into effect more quickly. And you know, I would anticipate that if there are problems with probate judges who don't sign that order, those cases would be appealed in due course to the Ohio Supreme Court. But we at least administratively have set into motion a path for people to be treated equally.
A lot of people don't understand the role of a Chief Justice or really understand the judiciary at that level that much. Can you tell us what you might do, where you would direct resources as a whole if you become the Chief Justice?
Well, you know, when you travel the state and you're campaigning for the role of Chief Justice, as I have for any race that I've had where, especially in my judicial, you start to do mental modeling about, okay, what would I do if I was in this role? What would I do if I was in this situation? And it comes to me over and over again that the education of the judges and the staff and the courts is just paramount. Because if there's misunderstanding about, for instance, a statewide criminal sentencing database where some trial judges are saying, well, we don't want to have all this data about how we sentence out there for the public to attack us. And that could go not just to racial or poverty or socioeconomic issues or education issues. It could also go to LGBTQ issues as well. You know, many times civil stalking protection orders in common pleas court are same sex between 2 people. And if the judge is not educated enough to understand that love is love is love, and and when these problems occur, it doesn't matter what gender or what gender someone identifies with. It's 2 people where one's actually experiencing harm from another. So many of these things, implicit bias, even not implicit bias, we have to be working with the judges because they are our face to the public, especially our trial court judges. And so, and there are going to be so many issues that are, I mean, you watch what's going on in the legislature right now and some of the things that are being talked about, and there's going to need to be a lot of education of judges to understand these underlying issues.
Okay, let me try to get this question in, and I'll be careful about the way I word it. But in rejecting abortion on the federal level, in the dissenting position that was written by Justice Thomas, he made mention that there might be other social issues that he could see being overturned by the court and returned to the states, and one of them was same-sex marriage. And of course, we know that's a case that grew out of Ohio. Jim Obergefell was the lead plaintiff in that case. It's not before you right now, but when you heard that Chief Justice or that Justice Thomas had made those comments, what was your personal reaction to that?
I wondered why he left out Loving v. Virginia. So,
no, you didn't.
well, I politely wondered. Let's go back before the Dobbs decision. You had the Rucho decision, which was really one of the impetuses for me to decide that I would run for the Ohio Supreme Court, because the Rucho decision essentially was along the same lines. There's not anything in the U.S. Constitution about gerrymandering, so we should not be dealing with it as a federal court. That belongs with the states. So that was a little bit of the thinking along that was a little bit of a precursor to the Dobbs decision. And so I think it will depend upon what the sentiment is of the conservative majority on the U.S. Supreme Court as to how many of these issues that were already decided and already declared to be substantive due process rights are now going to be reversed. And in this line of thinking that's a really pretty recent line of thinking about textualism and originalism, I could get into a lot of discussion on that by itself. So I wouldn't be surprised, unfortunately. What that does for people, if you look at it in the context of even the Dobbs decision, is if a person in a state where there's no leeway whatsoever for any type of situation where abortion would be legal, and then they begin to seek what they want to do in some other state, imagine the clinics in those other states and how backed up they get. And what if they're having to wait 2, 3, 4 months? Then they really don't have a choice. As far as, well, we'll leave it at that. And so I'm just saying, it's going to create this patchwork of laws all over the country, whether it's this issue or some other issue that basically arises from slamming down some substantive due process.
And this is happening on issues that many people thought were settled constitutional rights, right?
That is correct. And I think what people need to be aware of is when people running for justice of the Supreme Court talk about predictability, they're usually saying it in context with who's supporting them, which would be the Ohio Chamber of Commerce, or the Ohio Business Roundtable, or the Farm Bureau Federation, all fine organizations in and of themselves. But you've got to ask yourself as a voter, what does predictability mean? For me, in the law, predictability means predictability of the rule of law. That's why we have sort of this stare decisis way of deciding the law. If you want to understand how that works, think about Legos. Think about you put 4 Legos on the ground, and you can't build unless you're connected in one way or another, so that anytime you're deciding a new case, you look at something that's been similar, and it may be a little bit different this time, so maybe only two of the little prongs are connected on the Legos, but they're still connected because we grow that case little by little. But when you do an about flip and say, nope, that's not the law anymore, that is not predictability. So is it predictability of the law or predictability of outcome? And you've got to ask yourself what you think that person means when they talk about predictability.
You know, this is the first time on the justice races in Ohio we're going to see a D or an R after the candidates' names. We have traditionally, and I remember back when I was in law school, everybody talked about you don't see the D and the R because we don't want to know what their party affiliation is. We want a level of neutrality in the judiciary, and especially at the Supreme Court level. So how do you feel about going to the polls with all of the candidates having their party affiliation on the ballot?
Well, personally, I've won with Democrat next to my name statewide, and I've won with Democrat not next to my name statewide. In fact, the last time I won with Democrat next to my name, it was by 15 points in a 4-way race. Now, times were a little bit different. It's before we had 4 years of, things we weren't used to in the White House. My attitude's been, tell me the rules. I'll follow the rules. I'll run. I'll figure out how to win, because I'm really about public service. And Someone asked me today, what is your judicial philosophy? And I said, to do a good job. Because, all this stuff about textualism and originalism and who's an activist judge and who's a living constitutionalist, if you really want to research that, go back to the early 1980s, and there were conservative law students at Yale University who thought there weren't enough conservative lawyers in the law. And so they started the Federalist Society, and so all these philosophical labels are really political labels, and politics has no place in the courts.
And yet we hear people saying, well, that's a Federalist issue, because they've been pretty successful, have they not, at marketing the Federalist Society?
Well, sure, when somebody gives their business to them worth $1.6 billion, I think they would be successful.
Okay, we're almost out of time with your lone time up here, but just tell me this as we wrap up your session. What do you want voters to think about, or what should they be doing to research the judiciary before they go to the polls? Because, they talk about ballot fatigue. By the time you get to the judges, I don't know who any of these people are. Oh, I like the sound of that name. I'll vote for that. What should they really be doing before they vote for Justice and Chief Justice?
It's a great idea to look at somebody's website. I have a complete platform of things I want to do administratively for the court, because courts belong to the people. They belong to us, and justice matters for everyone. So look at what the person's platform is. If they don't have anything at all, you kind of wonder, are you going to be restrictive and regressive in how you move forward? Or are you going to be expansive in terms of outreach to the public and making the court real to the public? No judge wants to step out of their lane and step into a legislative or an executive lane. We know what judicial restraint is, but judicial outreach is another thing. And to make our courts real to the people allows people to have confidence in our courts, and our courts work better when we have that public confidence. If you think about the tools that we have to bring public confidence are simply words. And if we can give you that kind of confidence so that you understand what we say, what we mean, then we've done our job, and we've done our part as public servants to make your lives better.
All right, we thank you for being with us very much.
Thank you.
And I know you're going to stick around for the other panel. You're going to be here? Yeah, thank you. Jennifer Bruno, running for Chief Justice.
Welcome back, everyone. We are so grateful to have a full panel, a judicial panel, if you will, to discuss important issues that our court weighs in on. Our Supreme Court hears some of the most important cases in Ohio. They deal with cases of supreme importance that reach the court, but also cases of election law, death penalty law, administrative agency appeals, all of which are incredibly important. So this is a very important race that is on our ballot. We are a nonpartisan forum. We invited all candidates who are running for the office of justice. Not all were willing to attend or send a surrogate, or able to attend or send a surrogate, but we are so grateful tonight to have Justice Bruner, to have Judge Jameson, and to have Judge Zayas in attendance. Colleen, thank you so much again for being our moderator.
Thank you. And any attorney who has ever argued in front of a 3-judge panel, I'm here for you because I get to ask them the questions this time. No, thanks and welcome to all of you. I also want to give a very quick disclaimer. Terry Jameson and I went to law school together. We're often study partners and lunch gossipers, so I do have a personal relationship with Terry. So I just want to put that out there. And I've known Jennifer Bruner for 900 years, and I've interviewed Marilyn Zayas as well. So welcome to all of you. And this is the question that you all get, but I think it is a mandatory question. And I will start again with you, even though you've already given it to us. People want to know your judicial philosophy. That's become a catchphrase, but what they really want to know is, what kind? Are you a conservative? Are you a liberal? Are you someone who's down the middle? What can we expect from you? So tell us your judicial philosophy.
My judicial philosophy is to be a good judge. I said this before when we talked a moment ago, but as Chief Justice, I hope to inspire judges around the state to see themselves first as public servants who happen to be judges, and not otherwise. I once sat in a panel of appellate judges from around the country, and I mentioned that I thought we were public servants, and a gentleman from South Carolina said, well, when I was in the legislature, well, I was a public servant then, but now I'm a judge. And I said, well, I think the taxpayers pay our salary, so I just think I'm a public servant. So, you know, I actually had the plain dealer say to me, well, you're a living constitutionalist, right? I said, what? Where did you get that? Because, you know, when somebody says, oh, they're an activist judge, I've actually turned around and said to the reporter, do you know what an activist judge is? And they don't know either. And that's just supposed to be to imply something bad. But I think when they're saying you're an activist judge, they're saying that you are legislating from the bench, meaning you're stepping outside of your lane, and there are bright lines between legislative, judicial, and executive. And that's the last thing I would ever do. I wouldn't be able to look at myself in the mirror if I decided to make up laws. When I went to the Court of Appeals, I was reading a decision, and I saw a judge that I had really respected in the past, and she created some 3-part test, and I thought, where did that come from? We can't make those up. I mean, maybe if the law goes in that way, but I mean, we have to look at what the law is, whether it's coming from statute, whether it's coming from case law, whether it's coming from administrative rule, and we have to follow the law. In the end, we have to make it work for people and answer only the narrow question given to us. Don't give advisory opinions. And when we make it work for people, we have to do it in such a way that we have enough life experience. We're anticipating how this could play out down the line so that we're never going to hurt people with the law, because if we hurt people with the law, they will lose confidence in what we do, and they'll lose confidence in the rule of law, and that's what gives us predictability, safety, and a springboard to really pursue our dreams.
And Terry, we'll ask you the same question. Follow that and tell us your judicial philosophy.
I was just thinking that.
Just say ditto.
And you know, really a lot of it is ditto, because I am a person that I believe in equal access. I believe everyone has the right to be heard. And anybody that's ever been in my court knows, even when I was in domestic relations court, I wanted people to come in and feel that they were being heard. And after they were being heard, many times I said to them, you know, the law may not be on your side because our law is an adversarial system, but we want to make sure that we do it equitably, fairly, and that we are not doing anything intentionally that gives a disparate impact on anyone. So just making sure that people have the access, ability to be heard, and that they feel that the judge listened and gave them a fair and equitable opinion. That's what I do.
Judge Zayas?
Well, first, I'm really very honored to be here. I have a very clear judicial philosophy, and it's rooted in my experience as a child. So I'm originally from New York City. I was born in Spanish Harlem, and I grew up in Washington Heights in a time that it was completely devastated. It went from a working class neighborhood to something quite different because of the heroin epidemic and the drugs and the crime that came to the neighborhood. I also grew up in very difficult family circumstances. When people say dysfunctional, I say, thank you, that's an elevation. And being Latina, my parents are from Puerto Rico. In the 70s, there was a lot of discrimination. So growing up, all I really wanted was a fair chance. And now as a judge, that's what it's about. It's about giving people a fair chance. And you know how you do that? You faithfully apply the law and the Constitution equally to everyone, independent of politics and outside influences. I have a very clear judicial philosophy. When I've run, I've been supported by prosecutors, by public defenders. And when I ran in 2016, I came out of nowhere. I've never been involved in politics, had never heard the word PAC until I started to run, and I kept hearing this thing PAC, and I was like, what is that? And when I was elected, I mean, I squeaked in and everyone thought it was a fluke, but I won an unexpired term. I had to run again. I was on the ballot in 2018. So for someone that came out of nowhere, had a very strong opponent, raised 3 times what I raised, It was my judicial philosophy that got me to the win. Over 60%, over 20 points in the ballot less than 2 years from the date that I was first elected.
So let me ask you, how accurate was Lin-Manuel Miranda's portrayal of Washington Heights? You know, I'm just kidding. You don't
Well,
have to tell
I
me
did
that.
visit in November of last year, and it's accurate to what it is now, but it's not accurate to what I grew up in.
Okay.
But the pool, we used to go to that pool almost every
really?
week during the summer. My church.
See, it was a good question.
My church shows up in the movie. The building I grew up in shows up several times in the movie. So yes, it was like coming home.
So let me ask each of you as well. We are speaking to an audience of Equality Ohio has set this up. It's a nonpartisan panel. I want to keep emphasizing that every justice candidate was invited to be here. But can each of you tell me something that you've done in your career that you think is supportive of the LGBTQ community? And I'll start with you, Justice Bruno.
Thank you. The very first speech I ever gave as a candidate was to the Stonewall Democrats of Ohio. And Brian Shin pushed me out there and said, go ahead. I said, okay. And folks were wonderful. After Barbara Sokol passed away and her seat on the Legacy Fund of the Columbus Foundation was vacant, I was invited to serve and to fill that position as an ally member of the board. I ended up serving from 2012 until 2021, and thanks to Greg McConnell, our bylaws were such that when I became vice president, that meant that I became, or vice chair, I became the chair of the board. And when you're the first ally, it's kind of a gulp. I mean, you like think I got to do this really well because they're counting on me, and I'm the first one. So they asked me to serve for 3 years as chair. But I like to think that I helped just from my administrative skills in the transition where we did board member training on intersectionality. So we understood the differences within the family, within the community. We updated the bylaws. I was able to bring on Ed Chin and actually kind of mentor him to actually chair and take over the board. And we brought in a lot of younger people. So we brought in more diversity within the community and a lot of younger people. And we were fortunate to have some people like Denzel Porteous, who's now at Stonewall, who brought experience in from San Francisco to really make the board more sophisticated. So during COVID then, we were able to do, with a just small committee of 4 or 5 of us, flash grants for LGBTQ organizations that the fund actually supports, so that in need, in dire times of need like that, we were able to do some good. So I'm very grateful for that. I had to resign when I became a justice of the Supreme Court, but I'm grateful for that opportunity.
All right, that was great. And Terry? Justice?
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm still going to call you Terry. I don't care.
We're good. We're good. I did tell somebody one day, judges are not really my first name. But, my passion has always been youth. During 2020, particularly during the pandemic, we did drives for cleaning supplies, hygiene products for Kaleidoscope and other youth organizations. I've always been very involved with young people. I just believe that treating everyone fairly is just necessary. But this one fun fact, as soon as Obergefell became law, many people were going out to get married. But I did the first dissolution. So just for a fun fact. Because once marriage became legal, then I could do dissolutions. So I remember an attorney that shall remain nameless saying to us in the judicial meeting, "How's it going with the dissolutions?" I said, "Well, I did the very first one, so everything's going according to plan." But no, I really do enjoy working with Kaleidoscope. Have had a good relationship with Aaron the director and down through the years, and that is my passion, is young people.
And can we ask you the same question?
Absolutely. Judges bring ourselves to the bench. And what I mean by that is that I think it's important who we were before we were running, not who we are when we're running or when we take the seat. So I always say, like, if you want to know who a person really is, look at their Facebook feed, but go all the way back and just see how inclusive it is, and that'll tell you who they are, right? So I was always, I've always had friends, even back in the 70s, when, it's easy to do things when it's popular. It's when it's unpopular that it really shows what the character of the person is, as to who it is that they claim to be a friend and who they're proud to have as a friend. When Obergefell was decided, I can tell you where I was, because I was in Washington, D.C. I can tell you what I did. The first thing I did was call my 3 kids, and we all celebrated over the telephone, because it was, for us, a monumental moment for my family.
Thank you for that. Historically, gay people who are in the LGBTQ community, have not always felt that the judicial system was welcoming. Some of that has changed over the years, but it's not been a place where their rights were always protected and advanced. So what would you do to make sure that gay people have equal access to the courts and a fair day in court when they come before you?
I think I go back again to judicial education, because the judges are operating the courts at the trial court levels, and like I said, we've had training on implicit bias. Most of that's been focused on race, which needs to be, because especially in the criminal justice system. But like I said, with civil stalking protection orders, understanding that if someone's stalking someone else, it doesn't matter what gender or what somebody identifies as, it's real and it's harmful to that person. But in this case, I'm also pledging and planning to start a commission on fairness and equality in the courts in Ohio's legal system. So what that means is that we'll start a task force to lay the tracks for this, but that it would be a permanent commission that is going to be able to define its role in terms of measuring where bias may be or where discrimination may be, and also setting agendas for how that can be changed. But it won't stop there, because the court's also responsible for the admission of new attorneys, for the discipline of existing attorneys. And so we need to go clear to the point where people are graduating from law school and becoming attorneys. And if you think about a track, I ran track in high school finally when there was Title IX, thanks to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And the person on the inside of that track has the easiest way to go. That may be the person from Harvard, but the person who's on the outside of the track, we don't make the line straight across. We move that line up so that it's the same distance around for every single person. So if someone's coming from a background that is not as advantaged as someone who's on that inside track, we need to find ways to support them and get them in the same position that they would be if they'd had an easier time of it, so that when we come to electing our judges and later on down the road, they say, I want to do pure public service as a judge, that we will actually be able to have elected judges in Ohio who reflect the diversity of our community, and as a result, we'll have a better judiciary, and our lives and the quality of our lives will be better in Ohio.
And Terry, we're going to ask you the same. Justice Jameson, we're going to ask you the same question. Old habits die hard. I'm an old woman, people. Please forgive me. But how would you guarantee equal access and fair treatment for everyone in your court?
Well, I still go back to the juveniles, because that's where a lot of the issues are. We've seen an increase and an uptick in youth homelessness. And we've seen our young people struggling, especially our LGBTQ youth are struggling with homelessness. Some are being put out by parents. Some run away for different reasons. But I think homelessness and education flow together. So we have to make sure that we have education for school teachers, for lawyers, for the magistrates that work with our juveniles, to make sure that they understand what's really happening. Because sometimes they try to send children back home to home situations that are not the best for them, because you have parents that don't accept their children on the basis of who they are. So I think we need to come up with some different plans, training our foster parents to accept LGBTQ children into their homes as well, and treating them with all the dignity and respect that they need. We have an empowerment docket in Franklin County that often deals with juveniles that are trafficked, because sometimes when you're homeless, you do what you have to do to eat, to have lodging, whatever. So we have that empowerment docket in Franklin County that helps them to move out of those situations into places of safety. And you have to have the right type of education about the issues they're facing so that you can be a secure place, because the trust level for children that are abused and trafficked is different as well. So a lot of it does go back to education, but it's got to flow through all levels of the judicial system, and not just with the judges and magistrates, but with foster care, with all of the probation officers, with all of our service providers, because they have unique and distinct issues that have to be dealt with.
Okay, Judge Zayas.
I really look forward to joining the Supreme Court. You know, first is the obvious, which is the decisions that are made by the Supreme Court. And, you know, we talked about our judicial philosophies, and ultimately it is about applying the law equally to everyone, right? But it's also, there's another authority that the Supreme Court has, and that is that it has opportunities to set policy and procedure for all the courts in all 88 counties. For me, it's very important to treat people with dignity and respect. And as the Supreme Court, we should always be striving for opportunities so that people are treated with dignity and respect when they come to every court in all 88 counties. So, first of all, informing the public of that authority in order for there to be transparency and accountability, and then working with my fellow justices, because one thing I learned at Procter & Gamble is the most meaningful change you can make is not from the bottom up. The quickest, most meaningful change is from the top down.
We're just about out of time. We have a few minutes left, and I want to give each of you time to answer a question that I often ask candidates at the end of an interview. You are talking directly to voters tonight, so I want you to tell the voters of Ohio, I'll go in reverse order this time, but tell the voters in Ohio the one thing you want them to know about you and why.
Absolutely. Well, I'm the one that, growing up, was the kid that beat the odds. I'm the one that was supposed to be a statistic. I'm the one that was told when I was in 8th grade that I would never be a white-collar worker. And yet I came 34 years ago to work at Procter & Gamble. I was told when I was running in 2016, someone like you can never be elected to the Court of Appeals. I was told when I was elected to the Court of Appeals, you're just an anomaly, you'll never get reelected, okay? And here I am running for the Supreme Court. Why is that important? It's important because I don't squander these opportunities. I know what I was elected for. When I took my seat in 2016, knowing that I was going to be on the ballot immediately thereafter, I was told, Marilyn, your job is to keep your head down because you have to run again. And I knew that's not what I was hired to do. So you know on the Court of Appeals, there's 3 judges for every case. A majority is 3 or 2. My first day on the bench, I wrote 2 dissents. That's right, 2 times. First day on the bench, I explained why the majority was not following the law. I am running this race as what I'm calling a one-term race. I'm going in there to do the job for everybody with no concern, no consideration, no worries about whether I will be reelected after the 6-year term. I don't care. I am there to do the job because we are in a very pivotal moment. We need to restore the confidence in our judiciary. And we have a great opportunity to turn the corner and be the platinum standard for all the other courts so that when people come to any court in the state of Ohio, they don't believe, they know that they have a fair chance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Justice Jameson, your message to voters, what's the one thing you want them to know about you?
Well, I am a judge here in Franklin County, and I've been a judge here 10 years. Everyone that knows me knows that my court is open, it's available. I've always been available as a judge in the community as well as in the court. I also grew up in very humble beginnings. I'm a third-generation coal miner. I moved to West Virginia after I got from West Virginia to Ohio after I got laid off and had to start all over as a single parent with an 8-year-old. So I also know what it means to work hard. I know what it means to not be accepted. I know what it means. I've worked hard to bring programming to Franklin County to help men and women that were unemployed have opportunities. I've worked hard to be a community resource and provider for all types of individuals throughout the county and throughout the state. I've worked with data collection on disparate impact of school discipline and been featured in a documentary called Push Out, The Criminalization of Black Girls in School. I've done a lot in this community and before I came to the bench. I had my own business. I took resources into the community. I intend to continue to be a resource for anyone. I always have mentored and brought interns to every court that I've been in, regardless of race, creed, gender, sexual orientation. I've had staff attorneys of all orientations. I've always been the one that said, give someone that would not necessarily have a chance, give them a chance. And if you make it, or you don't make it, it's no reflection on me. I gave you the opportunity and gave you an opportunity to come up under a mentor that worked hard, someone that knows how hard it is and difficult it is for people to have an opportunity. So I've served, as I said, 10 years, 8.5 years in juvenile and domestic court, and now on the 10th District Court of Appeals. I brought diversity wherever I go, and I'm still here representing in Franklin County right now and would love to represent the state of Ohio with the same fervor and vigor that I brought to the bench here. I promise you that I will serve the same way at the Ohio Supreme Court. Thank you.
And finally, Justice Bruno, your message to Ohio voters.
The Chief Justice Office is a different office from an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. The votes are equal among the 7 justices, but the Chief Justice needs the kind of experience that I bring to the office. I have experience managing a statewide office of similar size with similar reach of satellite operations throughout the state of Ohio. I served as Ohio's 52nd Secretary of State from 2007 to 2011, supervising and overseeing the first Obama election. It was such a contentious election that I ended up, just in order to protect people's rights to vote, dealing with death threats and being guarded by the Highway Patrol 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 7 weeks straight. Interesting way to live your life. I wouldn't really choose it all the time. But it was worth it, and the reason it was worth it because I do what I do for public service. During that period of working as the Secretary of State, I was awarded the John F. Kennedy Profile and Courage Award, which was kind of a something I wasn't really looking for, but I was very happy that they recognized me, and my mother was exceptionally happy. And I had to write my speech. Imagine giving a speech in front of Ted and Caroline Kennedy. No nervous or anything, but I thought, well, what is in my heart about public service? And I thought, why do I do what I do? And it's fairness, equality, and respect. Those are what drive me in public service, and those will drive me for as long as I can serve. And when you're a judge, it's very close to those ideals, that you can actually make that happen, and that not just be the ideals of why you do public service. And so having that experience and being able to be the driver of how the court's going to move forward in this new century is a privilege for me to even be able to consider being able to do that. I would only be able to serve one term, but I got a lot done in 4 years, so with a 6-year term, we can get a whole lot done. And I really believe that this is critical to democracy. Because democracy, as I see it, the two great pillars, I've had such a privilege to deal with them as Secretary of State with elections, and now as a judge, this is at the third level, at the trial judge, Court of Appeals, and now Supreme Court. And whether you're voting in an election, directly electing your representatives, or whether you're serving on a jury and directly judging other members of your community or determining the outcome of their disputes, you want good caretakers of this. You want good public servants. And as many times as I've traveled in all 88 states of Ohio, Ohioans have decent values. I mean, they're looking, if you would say, what do Ohioans really value? It's quiet decency, honesty, fairness, hard work. These extremes that we've experienced, this is not Ohio. And we need a court that honors who Ohioans are, deals in fairness, is assuring equality, and giving the utmost of respect to all people. And so I hope as a justice to be able to do that, to have a court that follows in that suit, and to be able to inspire other judges to do the same. And if we can do that, Ohio will move eons forward. Thank you.
We want to thank this entire panel and once again remind everyone it would have been great to hear from all of the justice candidates, but remember who showed up for you. And thank you all three for being here. And thank you to Equality Ohio. We have some closing comments.
I'll take that one since that one's working. Thank you everyone so much for joining us this evening. We are so excited that you took time out of your evenings to join us for our first ever statewide candidate forum. First, I have to thank Robert Kaplan for making this beautiful space available to us. Was this not beautiful? These views, my goodness. I also want to thank Mr. Orweiler for the beautiful art that we've got here. Oh my gosh, the beautiful art that we've seen also. And of course, I want to thank our public policy director, Maria Bruno, as well as the entire policy team at Equality Ohio for doing an absolutely amazing rock star job on this event tonight. I also want to remind everyone, we're here about an election, right? So your job when you leave here tonight is to continue engaging with our candidates, to remember that early voting starts on October 12th, that our general election is November 8th, but that you've got all that time to send in an absentee ballot, mail that in, show up at your board of electors, right? There's so many ways to do it. If you've got any questions about how to vote, where to vote, Equality Ohio can help you out with that. Please go to equalityohio.org. Check out our statewide scorecard. That is going to give you lots of information on what every single candidate and what our sitting legislators believe about LGBTQ plus equality and our right to live with lived equality and legal equality here in Ohio. So please, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for being engaged in this process, because we are never going to move forward unless we are all in it. But together, we are going to do amazing things. Remember to vote on November 8th. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful night.